Chapter 6:15. Amber City. This city, which had prospered because of the Agate River, had completely declined overnight. The disaster that happened that night had a profound impact on Amber City. Even if the survivors wanted to rebuild the city, there was no way to restore it to its former glory. Soren walked along the broken streets. The once smooth paved road had almost turned into a muddy road. Because there was not enough wealth to repair it, many broken buildings could still be seen in the once prosperous city, as well as the broken walls left behind after the fire. At night, near the mass grave, the cries of ghosts could be heard from far away. Too many innocent people died in Amber City that night. Some of these souls still lingered in the mortal world, wandering near the mass grave where Soren found the treasure cave. Soren came to the cemetery. He found a small grave in the corner of the corner. It was the grave of the loyal old dog, Heath. Everything that happened in the past was still vivid in his mind. But now, he was qualified to stand on the clouds and look down on all living things. The wharf of Amber City was deserted. Merchants no longer came here. Now that the continent was in turmoil, it was not suitable for trade. There was only a dilapidated warehouse left, which had been empty for a long time. Soren even saw the warehouse where he practiced his lockpicking skills, but now the door was wide open, and there was not even a ghost in sight. There were too many beggars. Soren saw many poor beggars. These people were afraid of Soren's aura and did not dare to approach him, but they looked at him with begging eyes. Sigh. Soren sighed slightly. He threw out a handful of copper dirhams, and soon a group of beggars scrambled for them. What he saw in front of him. It really reminded him of the scene after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. In the future, such scenes would become more and more common, and it might even be more miserable than all of this. Amber City was no longer sustainable. The city was full of lethargy, and there was not even a trace of vitality in it. Soren passed through the ruins of the central city. This was the epicenter of the disaster. There was no way to clean up the ruins, so they could only build a new residential area somewhere else. Past here was the only intact temple area. With the power of the gods, the priests in the temple area blocked the attacks of the disciples of fear and the undead. Now, it was the most popular area in Amber City. The result of the battle was a lose-lose situation. It was said that there were other legendary professions in that battle. The Fear Church also suffered heavy losses. At the very least, the Terror Knights and Blasphemy Priests were wiped out. A group of children appeared in Soren's sight. They were all half-grown children, wearing tattered clothes that had been washed until they were white and had patches on them. They gathered outside a temple and looked inside with longing eyes. Hunger. The price of food in the mainland had doubled, and there were starving people everywhere. Come here. A gentle female voice rang out, and then the children swarmed over like a swarm of bees. Soren suddenly stopped. His expression was startled, and then he walked forward. In his sight was a young and beautiful priestess. Unlike the other delicate and weak priestesses, she had a very strong aura. This priestess wore the emblem of the Lord of Dawn. She used to be a trainee priestess, but now she had begun to manage a church alone. She seemed to have become a regional bishop of the Church of Dawn. The priestess, Angelia. The girl who had helped Soren and Vivian return to Amber City, took over the former temple, and seemed to have adopted some orphans. Lord Bishop. A young girl with freckles took Andrea's place and became a probationary priest. She quietly came to the priestess and whispered, "We can't go on like this. There's no one donating to the temple now. It's too expensive to do this every day. I'm afraid we'll go bankrupt soon." The priestess' smile froze, and then she said calmly, "Are we almost out of money?" "Yes." The priestess nodded. After a dry laugh, Angelia glanced at the children in front of her and whispered, "It's fine. I'll take on a few more adventuring quests in a few days. We'll be able to earn some money soon." She had been supporting the children by working as an adventurer. Now that Amber City could no longer support the temple, she was very popular among adventurers as a priestess. "Someone wants to donate?" Suddenly, the trainee priest's eyes lit up. She quickly walked over and saw a man who looked like a tough hunter. Why would a hunter donate to the Church of Dawn? Is he begging the Lord of Dawn to give him more prey? I don't care. It's been a long time since someone donated. I really hope he'll donate more money. The priestess tried to smile as kindly as she could. Then she saw the man in the hunter's outfit put something that looked like a stone into the donation box. She didn't hear the crisp sound of gold and silver colliding. Instead, she heard the sound of a stone falling to the ground. The apprentice girl's smile immediately stiffened. Could it be that this annoying guy in front of her really threw a broken stone inside? She waited patiently for the man to leave. After the man left, the priestess immediately opened the empty donation box. Sure enough, there was not a single kindler or silver dural in it. The man really did throw a stone into the box. The priestess was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. But when she took out the stone from the donation box, she was stunned. It was an unpolished diamond, the original form of a diamond. Her hands trembled slightly. The priestess did not know how much the diamond was worth, but judging by its size, even an idiot would know that it was very valuable. So, she quickly took the diamond and ran to the bishop, panting. Sister Bishop. We finally met a tycoon today. Revisiting old haunts. Amber City gave Soren a little feeling, but it was just a feeling. He quickly put it down and continued on his way. His next destination was Whiterun. Soren was going to see what was going on in the city. At the same time, he wanted to find out more about the ancient red dragon. The ancient red dragon had a challenge rating of 24 and above, and it was basically as difficult to kill as a lesser god. So far, no god had personally dealt with it, and it was almost impossible for mortals to kill it. Soren felt that since he was already here, he would feel bad if he did not check it out. Chapter 6:16. Whiterun City. It took Soren less than a day to travel from Amber City to Whiterun City. The once bustling trade route had been completely abandoned. Autumnfall was devastated by the attack of the orcs, and the handicrafts from the Elven Kingdom and the Half-Elven Kingdom had completely lost their market. The road to Whiterun City was blocked by the ancient red dragon, and the impact of the double blow was quite terrible. Especially the chaos caused by the migration of all kinds of monsters. Many villages and towns that were not strong enough to defend themselves had to migrate. Although humans had a large number of people, they did not have an absolute advantage in the natural world. The current productivity could not support the explosion of population at all. Human villages could only be formed near suitable farmland because there were still many other species in the wilderness that were not suitable for cultivation. Food was the key to restricting the reproduction of a large number of creatures. With the transportation capacity of this era, most of the food could only be produced by oneself. The consumption rate of transportation was quite high, and there was a high possibility of being attacked by other species. Unless there was a huge force that had completed a huge project similar to the transportation of water. For now, it seemed. This possibility was almost impossible. So Soren saw many abandoned villages along the way. These villages migrated largely because of the frequent attacks by wild creatures. The decrease in population and the increase in danger made them unable to cultivate in peace. In the absence of enough strength to protect themselves, many small and medium-sized villages and towns began to migrate or merge. Golden Creek Town. This was a town that rose rapidly during the Age of Turmoil. Soren passed by this town on his way to Whiterun City. He and Vivian had also come to this town when they followed Gloria's caravan. And it was the first time he met a sword saint here. Today, the size of Golden Creek Town had tripled. There were reinforced thick wooden walls outside, and the population had at least multiplied several times compared to the past. It looked like a small city. All of these changes were due to the pressure from the outside world. The threat of wild creatures caused nearby villages and towns to migrate here, and a large number of humans began to build fortifications and formed an army to protect civilians. Golden Creek Town had a strong geographical advantage and manpower. Under such circumstances, it immediately became the most important human settlement in the vicinity. Soren stopped for a while. 2 watchtowers were erected in front of the thick and heavy gate of the stronghold, and there were guards on top of the walls. Soren even saw the silhouettes of rangers, who were in charge of scouting out the movements of wild creatures. The security here was tight, and the ratio of the militia was as high as 1/5. Soren saw a few barracks where the militia was being trained, which made him feel the aura of war. The smithy was bustling with activity, and many military weapons were placed on the shelves. This wasn't just to prevent attacks from wastelanders, but also to reclaim their lost territory. No creature was willing to give up their land so easily. Humans were forced to migrate. Once they regrouped, they would naturally take back their land. It was a sharp gaze. Soren suddenly felt that someone was watching him. When he turned around, he was surprised to see a familiar young man. A sword saint. It was a high-level sword saint with a straight blade on his back, dressed in plain cotton clothes, and stained with blood. It was the same person Soren had seen before. His aura had become even sharper, and his entire person was like a sharp sword. The murderous aura around him was very strong, which probably had something to do with the current environment where monsters ran rampant. The sword saint met Soren's gaze and was startled for a moment. He seemed to have sensed Soren's strength, so he nodded slightly and left. A high-level hunter. This was the sword saint's judgment, and also the ability Soren had displayed. Most sword saints were quiet people. Sometimes, they would rather use their swords to express themselves than talk too much nonsense. Soren noticed that the people were looking at him with respect. It seemed that this young sword saint had gained the respect and recognition of the people with his strength during this period of time. Sword saint was an advanced profession that attached great importance to actual combat. If this young sword saint entered the ranks of advanced professions at such a young age, a legendary sword saint might be born in Golden Creek Town in the future. It was very likely that this town would become even more prosperous because of him. Soren did not stay for too long. He quickly left the town and continued on his way to Whiterun. The road had been abandoned for a long time, and there were weeds everywhere. After walking for about 20 kilometers, a notice board appeared in Soren's sight, with a message written on it: "Be careful of danger. There are Ankhegs here." Skull symbol. Ankhegs? Soren smiled faintly and continued on his way. After walking for about 5 kilometers, he found traces of other people on the ground. They seemed to have come from another road. "Be careful. There's another one behind you," a middle-aged man exclaimed, and then a chaotic battle ensued. From the sounds of it, there were quite a few people. Soren even heard the familiar buzzing sound of the Ankhegs. It was a droll. Soren leaped into the air and leaped from tree to tree, leaving behind afterimages. He quickly found his target, but the most eye-catching one was a droll. It looked like a black bear, but it spoke in authentic Elven. A droll of the wild. They were the shapeshifters of the droll. They were proficient in all kinds of shape-shifting spells, and most of the time, they relied on shape-shifting to fight. A priest. He wore a tattered priest robe, had a scar on his face, and was fighting with a priest's staff in his hand. Soren saw a special emblem on his body. It was a picture of pale hands tied with a red rope. This was a priest of the god of suffering, a god who held the titles of endurance, suffering, martyrdom, and perseverance. This was a kind and lawful god. He was also known as the weeping god. His followers included the disabled, the oppressed, the poor, monks, paladins, slaves, serfs, and so on. The reason why Soren was so familiar with this deity was that he had recently carefully recalled the information of this deity. The god of suffering, Ilmater. He protected those who suffered, and the god of the hunt, Maelor, was one of the most important enemies of this god. There were a lot of Ankhegs. In front of Soren, other than the professionals who could fight, there were also a lot of civilians. These civilians relied on them to block the Ankhegs from devouring them. The strongest fighter in the crowd was a monk. He was not a monk from the east, but a local monk who had received training. There was an independent group of monks in the god of suffering, Ilmater's church. This group of monks was called the broken, the broken. It was a group of monks who believed in the weeping god. The members of the group were not only responsible for protecting their followers and temples, but also for punishing those who cruelly harmed others. Evil deeds. These monks could be priests, and they could also advance into the ranks of secret believers, holy warriors, divine believers, divine power seekers, and even saints. They would not be punished by leaving their professions. This was the result of the fusion of the power of the gods and the training of the monks. The broken monks were very powerful advanced professions. The battle became more and more intense. However, the situation was not over yet. This was because the priests of the god of suffering were very good at healing, and this was related to their teachings. Although many people misunderstood the teachings of the weeping god, and some even mocked his teachings, the Church of Ilmater had many faithful followers all over the continent. In this cruel and realistic world, many victims, the sick, and the poor relied on the Church of Ilmater to survive. Many people in many areas respected the Church of the Weeping God, and his priests often received generous help when they practiced medicine everywhere for free. The middle-aged priest in front of him. He was one of the few members of the church in the current material plane who would completely provide free healing to others. The target of this healing was the poor, the civilians, the slaves, and so on. The priests of the God of Suffering were not very common. They were too active in their own parish. Because of some kind of conversion ceremony, before death, all the priests of the weeping god's healing ability was more than 1.5 times that of other priests. Chapter 6:17. Please subscribe. This is going to break the record. The monk in front of him should be an advanced holy Saya. Of course, this was just a joke among adventurers. The full name of this class should be Holy Saya, a high-grade class that could use divine power and divine grace. The so-called divine power was actually the divine power possessed by the gods. If Soren wanted to create a new advanced class, it was not impossible with his current strength. For example, he could share a part of his divine power and cultivate a special advanced class similar to a Nightwalker from the Rogue domain. Or the most basic variant of Dark Guardian, and so on. These could be created as long as one had the Evil domain. The Shadow Lord had created such a special advanced class. However, the creation of such a special class required a high price. For example, the Holy Saya in front of him used the divine power of the weeping god in battle. The conversion ratio of this divine power was quite low. Maybe the monk needed 1 point of divine power, but the effect was less than 1/10. This kind of advanced class could only be cultivated by gods with abundant divine power or a wide range of believers. For example, the god of suffering had a large number of believers, but he rarely participated in battle. He had been a god for a long time and had basically mastered the power of divinity. He did not need to fight too much with others. After accumulating for a long time. In the past, the accumulated divine power was either used to strengthen the kingdom or used to bestow special abilities to his believers. The Avatar crisis was coming. This kind of special advanced class would be greatly affected. Otherwise, this monk would not have been besieged by a group of Ankegs. He could have killed one of them with a single blow when he was at his peak. This was because the additional damage of divine power was quite amazing. Special orders like the Broken were weakening. Soren was still not sure whether the god of suffering had fallen from the sky, but he was sure that this god did not have any extra divine power to bestow upon the holy Saya below. Priests had to bestow divine spells at their discretion, so there was no need to mention the additional abilities of other classes. There were a lot of Ankegs. Back then, Soren had encountered Ankegs in the vicinity. Perhaps it was because of the favorable environment, the Ankegs multiplied rapidly and formed an environment similar to that of a colony. There were more than a dozen Ankegs in front of them, and there might be more underground monsters that had yet to emerge. The challenge rating of the Ankegs was level 5 and above. Back in the day, they were known as the Rookie Killer, because if the player's endurance was not strong enough, the acid that they spat out could kill them instantly. Basically, if any of these civilians were hit, none of them would be able to pass the immunity test. That was why the professions were beaten up so badly by the Ankhags in order to save them. Sometimes, it was really hard to understand the thoughts of these kind-hearted professions. Soren even saw the priest blocking an attack from an Ankhag in order to save a civilian. Fortunately, the priest was also considered half a melee profession. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have been seriously injured. Many of the injuries of these people were caused by defending civilians. If Soren was the one dealing with the enemy, he would definitely not do this. However, everyone in this world had their own opinions. Although he would not do this, it did not mean that he did not respect such people. It was just like how he treated the paladins. If things continued this way, not many people would survive. Not many of these people could survive. Those who were in the lawful good camp would always drag themselves into the mud. Therefore, there were very few people in the lawful good camp in this world. Leave them to die? Soren thought for a while and decided to make a move. However, he had to wait until the situation was more critical. He felt that he could use the power of the god of suffering to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. Even if it was just a small blow to the Church of the Hunt, it would reduce the difficulty of Soren's sniping. Swoosh! Just as the situation became critical and the priest was about to be killed by the Ankhags, Soren suddenly made his move. A sharp arrow flew out. Soren did not choose to reveal his true strength. He was currently disguised as a ranger and a hunter, so his main weapon was still the bow. It was a +2 rare grade bow with +2 penetration and +1 armor penetration. Against creatures like the Ankhags, it was basically equivalent to killing one with one arrow. With 3 arrows, Soren instantly resolved the crisis. 3 Ankhags were hit in the head. 2 were dead and 1 was heavily injured. Reinforcements. The sudden arrival of reinforcements lifted the spirits of these people. Droll quickly retreated and recovered a lot under the priest's divine spell. He then roared and charged forward again. The following battle was much simpler. With Soren's long-range support, the number of Ankhags gradually decreased. Soon, they could no longer withstand the pressure and retreated. Thud. Soren's figure jumped down from the tree. He was now disguised as a quiet high-grade hunter. He glanced at the others and began to collect the loot on the ground. The valuable items from the Ankhags. Wealth. This was also one of the predetermined identities. It was also the key to easily get close to the Church of the Hunt. After all, only a person who craved wealth would do such a thing to please the evil god of the hunt. He would even help the Church of the Hunt for wealth and power. Thank you. Thank you. May I know your name, sir? The survivors came over to express their gratitude. Perhaps they were afraid of Soren's strength, but they did not get too close to him. Soren looked at them coldly and slowly said, "I'm Soros." After that, he looked at the group of civilians behind him. Almost all of them were dressed like Highlanders. It seemed like they lived nearby and were carrying a lot of things with them. It seemed like they were planning to migrate. However, Soren could roughly guess what happened after they spoke. These Highlanders were probably planning to migrate to another place, so they asked for help. The believers of the god of suffering loved to help people in need. Now that the area around Whiterun was getting more and more dangerous, they probably wanted to escort these people to a safe place. If not for Soren, these people would have been in deep trouble. This reminded Soren of the Paladins. When the Avatar crisis broke out, the Paladins, as the representatives of the righteous faction, did a lot of similar things. However, sometimes without outside help, their excessive pursuit of justice would always make things worse. Sometimes there was no way to make necessary sacrifices, but the Paladins rarely did that. Sometimes they were willing to sacrifice themselves, but they did not think that after they sacrificed themselves, the fate of others would be even worse. These guys, whose beliefs were more important than their lives, often made mistakes out of kindness and made things irreparable. Perhaps it was because they were too firm in their beliefs that they would do many unimaginable things. They were noble, great, and glorious, but in Soren's opinion, they were not lacking in stupidity. Or else. Things like that would not have happened in the City of Wealth. P.S. With hand-holding as the standard, the previous book needs to be overhauled. I've been so busy recently. Please auto-subscribe. Chapter 6:18. I'm so busy that I'm dizzy. The front gradually approached the battlefield. Soren did not choose to go with the followers of the god of weeping. Although he did not dislike those who were in the lawful good camp, he did not like to have too much contact with them. This was purely a matter of worldview, but these people could still be used. The most obvious point was that the lawful good camp liked to meddle in other people's business. Many of them could not stand the evil in the world, so Soren revealed some information about the god of the hunt, Mailer, to them. The god of weeping and the god of the hunt had been enemies for thousands of years, to the extent that they had to oppose what the enemy wanted to do. With their way of doing things, if they knew that the followers of the god of the hunt, Mailer, were holding a bloody sacrificial ceremony, then the Church of the God of Suffering would definitely take action. Not only would they help the innocent, but more importantly, fighting the enemy was also their daily activity. The Church of the God of Suffering hated the two gods the most. One was the god of the hunt, Mailer, and the other was the Maiden of Pain. These two chaotic and evil gods had a close relationship, and the god of suffering hated them as much as Mother Earth hated the Lady of Poison. This hostile relationship between the gods even extended to the daughter of Mother Earth, who was now the goddess of agriculture. Soren did not have any real gods that he regarded as an enemy. If he became enemies with the Shadow Lord in the future, his followers' first target would be the Shadow Lord's church. Once this kind of war between gods began, it would be difficult to stop. The hundreds of years of war would lead to the accumulation of hatred and hatred. The War of the Ogres. Soren participated in a legendary battle, although he only participated in the identity of a small mercenary. But it was also the first time he saw the real power of a legendary battle in this world. The power of the Storm Lord gave him a great shock at that time, and also allowed him to gain his first legendary point. This was still the territory of the ogres, but this time the ogres were a little different. Their clan had changed to another clan, the Split Skull clan. More importantly, these ogres were the servants of the ancient red dragon. After hiding for so long, the ancient red dragon finally showed its claws and teeth. Because it became more and more impatient with the spying of humans and other intelligent creatures, the ancient red dragon began to enslave other races as servants to help it solve some small problems. Dragons had a habit of living. Before reaching adulthood, most dragons preferred to be alone with each other. But as time passed, their strength grew stronger and stronger, and the dragons became more confident. They believed that they could control other races, so they began to enslave some servants. Under normal circumstances, dragons would begin to control their servants after they reached their prime. When they reached their old age, they would begin to rely on their servants to manage their caves. These servants included all kinds of creatures, and sometimes even species from other planes. This depended on the strength of the dragon. The ancient red dragon naturally had enough confidence to control other species, so it controlled more and more servants. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the red dragon even forcibly enslaved other dragons as its mate, but now the creatures under its control should be limited to the nearby wilderness creatures. Through the dense forest, Soren quickly found traces of the ogres. This group of ogres wasn't very strong. They were mainly there to help the red dragon fend off adventurers who weren't strong enough, so they wouldn't let small ants disturb its peace. Any dragon that reached the age of the ancient red dragon would have much less energy and physical strength than before. They needed a long time to sleep. This was also the reason why someone could sneak into the dragon's treasure house. Soren passed through the territory of the ogres, and there were many traces of gnolls in front of him. There were also many other creatures here, such as lizardmen, hill giants, and vampires. It was purely an accident that he found traces of vampires. Soren had always been very sensitive to the smell of blood. When he went to the ancient red dragon's lair, he saw a corpse that had been sucked dry of blood. The corpse of a gnoll. In the entire material plane, only vampires would do this, and the ancient red dragon was the most powerful and evil of the Penishade dragons. Most of the dark creatures were under its control. The city of Whiterun had tried to explore this place many times. But in the end, almost no one was able to see the ancient red dragon alive. Too few people were sent out, and they died in front of the guards. Too many people were sent out, and the creatures enslaved by the ancient red dragon easily defeated the army of Whiterun. So far, no one had forced the ancient red dragon to fight in person. The legendary wizards of the ogres alone were enough to make them suffer. The ancient red dragon's monster level was above level 30. Its challenge rating was above level 24. Against a creature that had almost reached the peak of its power, all the legendary creatures in the wilderness of Whiterun had to bow down to it. Tauren. Soren's figure landed on the ground. He looked at the footprints in front of him with an interesting expression. Subterranean creatures. Taurens rarely lived on the surface. They were mostly active in the Underdark. They often appeared in labyrinths, but the dragon would occasionally use them as guards outside the treasure house. There was a passage here that connected to the Underdark. Almost after judging the number of footprints of the Tauren, Soren immediately determined this point. There were not so many Tauren in the surface world. Looking at the number of footprints, there were more than 10 of them. This was definitely from the Underdark. Of course, the ancient red dragon had servants to prepare everything, but the creatures it enslaved still needed to hunt. The Tauren's footprints looked like they came out to hunt, and there were also traces of large creatures being dragged. There were many passages that connected to the Underdark. Soren didn't know many of them, so he secretly paid attention to his surroundings. However, he couldn't find a clear entrance. After passing through the forest in front of him, a towering mountain range appeared in Soren's sight. This was the ancient red dragon's nest, but it wasn't located outside the mountain range. It was located somewhere in the innermost part of the mountain range. It was easy to find. Soren only needed to follow the footprints left behind by other creatures. This mountain range had become the ancient red dragon's private territory. A large number of flying dragon subspecies appeared in his sight. It was certain that they had migrated from other places. Most of them were wyverns. They were a subspecies that originally lived near the swamp, but now, more than 10 of their nests had migrated here. No wonder Whiterun hadn't found anything. All 3 sides of the mountain range had been sealed off. Servants were patrolling the area below, and a large number of wyverns were watching the area above. Even the area near Dustwallow Swamp was guarded by lizard men enslaved by the ancient red dragon. Without the strength of a legendary, it was impossible to break into the dragon's nest. Chapter 6:19. Forget it. The previous books have been sealed, so be it. I'm annoyed by the changes, so I'll focus on writing this book. I'll start adding chapters the day after tomorrow. Soren gradually approached the interior of the mountain. Suddenly, he seemed to have felt something and quickly moved in a certain direction. The perception of the gods was very sensitive. They had an amazing ability to sense the elemental energy of the outside world, various magic waves, and even abnormalities in the environment. As soon as Soren entered the interior of the mountain, he immediately felt the abnormality of the energy of the veins. The fire element was too rich and surging. The density of this element was beyond the normal range of the environment. Even when he closed his eyes, he could feel the terrible power of the fire element in the depths of the earth. What happened? Soren's expression became serious, and he murmured, "Did history deviate? I don't remember there being such an amazing abnormality here." In the past, Soren rarely paid attention to the ancient red dragon. Although he knew that there was an ancient red dragon here, no one would challenge it for no reason. Therefore, he was not very clear about the situation inside the mountain. The closer he got, the more obvious the abnormality of the fire element became. Soren was almost certain that the ancient red dragon's lair was in front of him, but he did not know what exactly happened. Magma. Soren saw something that did not make sense. It was difficult to see magma in nature because of the environment. Magma would quickly cool down, but the magma in front of him flowed out from the mountain in front of him. The temperature nearby was a little high, and the magma actually gathered into a pool. This doesn't make sense. Soren pressed his palm on the ground and murmured, "This is an active volcano?" That was impossible. There are no volcanoes in this geographical environment. He did not know the reason. An active volcano was born in this mountain. Although it had not completely erupted, Soren finally knew the key to the abnormality of the fire element. This was something that had been artificially created. Therefore, nature rejected the energy here. The gods were also very aware of it. A huge force was brewing inside the mountain. Soren expanded his senses to the limit. He could feel that deep underground, close to the depths of the Underdark, there was a huge amount of fire energy waiting to erupt. If it were to erupt, the terrifying volcanic eruption would engulf an area of several hundred kilometers. Fortunately, there was no city nearby. Otherwise, half of the country would be destroyed. However, if the volcano were to erupt, the nearby creatures would be annihilated. The Dust Wallow swamp and misty forest would be severely affected. Is it the doing of that ancient red dragon? Soren couldn't be sure of this, but he was sure that there weren't many creatures in the material plane that had the ability to do this. Other than the gods and saints, there were only a few creatures above level 30 that could do this. Ancient red dragons like to live near volcanoes. There shouldn't be any volcanoes here, but now there was a volcano that was about to erupt. Soren felt that there was a huge secret hidden here, and it might have something to do with the Underdark. Because he saw traces of the drows. That's right. Drows. Real drows. Unlike the drows in Mordor who were mixed with the blood of other races, Soren saw pure drows in front of him. So he was not surprised to see a female drow priest with a snake whip whipping another male drow. The other party stood where he was, not daring to move. He allowed the snake-headed whip to strike his back. In just 2 or 3 strikes, his entire back was badly mutilated, looking exceptionally horrifying. Trash. The female drow priest with a rather coquettish appearance but dark skin scolded angrily and roared, "So many people can't even catch a surface elf. What if the matriarch's plan is leaked? Damn it. What's the use of raising trash like you?" Soren approached quietly. He found that these drows were a bit abnormal. They seemed to have slight whitening characteristics, so they were not afraid of the sunlight of the surface world at all. A drow warrior with a cold face bowed his head slightly and said in a deep voice, "Priest. That's a very powerful droll. He's good at tracking and sneaking. We need more elite rangers to find him. But he's still injured, so he shouldn't be able to escape too far. I'll send people to continue looking for him." The female drow priest's chest rose and fell, and she said in a deep voice, "Go. What are you all doing here? Or do you want me to feed you to the lizards?" The other drow warriors immediately moved. They spread out in all directions as if they were looking for a druid in stealth. Did anyone else notice the abnormality here? Soren's figure stood in the shadows. He looked at the drows in front of him, then turned and approached a place. As a god who held the title of Wanderer, it was impossible for these drows to find Soren. Now he had 2 choices. One was to go into the crater to spy on the situation and see what happened. But there should be an ancient red dragon inside, so this was a little risky. The other was to go directly to the droll they were talking about. That droll might know what happened. As long as Soren found him 1 step ahead of them, he could figure out what happened. Tracking. Sneaking. This was Soren's strength. He found some traces almost quickly, and then quickly moved towards the south of the mountain. A little bit of blood. Although it could be covered up, it couldn't escape Soren's eyes. A natural low cave appeared in his sight. It was near a pile of rocks halfway up the mountain. There was a faint sound of breathing inside, and there was a faint smell of blood. "Who is it?" Just as Soren approached quietly, a vigilant voice sounded. Surprised. Soren didn't expect that the other party could find him. It seemed that this guy's sneaking ability was really strong. It was a black bear. Soren also saw the corpse of another black bear. He couldn't help curling his lips and looking at the other side with a bit of appreciation. He slowly said, You killed the black bear in this bear cave? Then you disguised yourself as it and hid? No wonder they couldn't find you. A very good plan. The pressure of a god was this shocking. After seeing that Soren wasn't a drow, the black bear in front of him suddenly turned into a tall and strong middle-aged elf. He already realized the difference between the two of them. Soren could easily erase his existence. The middle-aged droll's face was very pale and his aura was very weak. It seemed like his injuries were very serious. He slightly bowed and said, "I wonder who your excellency is?" "I am a droll member of the Dense Fog Forest Council, Burrow Cheetah. There is an elemental anomaly here. I was ordered to investigate the cause of this anomaly, but I never thought that I would meet a drow here. Their matriarch is colluding with a red dragon, as if they are planning a terrifying scheme. Your Excellency. My injuries are very serious. Since you are a human on the surface, you definitely don't want to see the evil creatures of the Underdark succeed. I wonder if you can help me send this information to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council?" Very honest. In the face of absolute power, the droll in front of him made a very wise decision. The drow matriarch? Soren couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He looked at the other side and said, "Which drow matriarch? Menzoberranzan City? Shadow City? Or Katnoros City?" The drow matriarch was actually colluding with an ancient red dragon. There was a lot of information in this matter. Even Soren couldn't figure it out because the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, might be behind this. "I don't know." The pale droll in front of him shook his head and said with a hoarse voice, "But there is a drow city under this mountain. There is a passage inside the volcano that directly connects to the Underdark." Entrance? The entrance to the Underdark was inside the volcano? No wonder Soren couldn't find it anywhere. There were clearly creatures of the Underdark here, but Soren couldn't find the passage to the Underdark. The creatures of the Underdark wouldn't appear for no reason. Now he finally understood everything. All right. Soren didn't think for too long and quickly nodded, "Tell me everything you know. I will pass it on to the Dense Fog Forest and the Silver Moon Council." As a rogue who had lived in the Underdark for a while, Soren was very clear on how serious the conspiracy the drow matriarch was involved in was. There was definitely the shadow of the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, behind this. Because if the matriarch personally made a move, it was either to please the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, or to complete the Oracle of the Queen of Spiders. The Avatar crisis was coming. The Queen of Spiders was the most terrifying and evil hunter. The things she was plotting would definitely cause terrible destruction. Moreover, her greatest ambition had always been to let the drows attack the surface. Soren wasn't sure what was hidden here, but since he knew some things, he couldn't completely stand by and watch. Making trouble for the Queen of Spiders was good for world peace. Heal serious wounds. With Soren's ability, he could cast a restore spell because he had the ability of a level 20 priest. He could cast most of the divine spells, although it would consume divine power. However, if he did so, his identity as a divine being would be exposed. Therefore, he could only pretend that he had activated a piece of high-grade equipment and cast a heal serious wounds divine spell on the other party, accompanied by the brilliance of the divine spell. Droll in front of him was obviously much better. He looked at Soren in surprise and slowly said, "This is what happened." Chapter 620. The wind howled. Soren used fly and rushed toward the misty forest. He learned the whole story from the droll. During this time, the chaos near Whiterun had spread far and wide, but because it only affected the humans near Whiterun, neither the elves nor other races paid much attention to it. It wasn't until the Droll Council and the Misty Forest detected the abnormality of the elemental energy in the mountains that it slightly attracted their attention. The Droll Council didn't want to offend a powerful red dragon, so they only sent a high-grade droll to spy on the situation. This spying was incredible. The droll found that this place had become an active volcano. This was obviously a man-made volcano, which caused the elemental energy nearby to be abnormal. Burrow Cheetah was a droll who was proficient in stealth. When he first discovered the creatures in the Underdark, he also felt that something was wrong. So, he went deep into the volcano to spy on the situation, but he didn't expect an even more amazing conspiracy to surface. The bottom of this volcano was directly connected to the Underdark, and he also found a city of drows nearby. The volcano on the surface world was on top of a volcano in the Underdark. Before he could figure out what was going on, he was then discovered by the elite guards of the drows. After a chase, he met Soren, who happened to come over. There was no doubt. There must be a huge conspiracy hidden in this. A drow's matriarch and an ancient red dragon colluded together. There was no need to guess that they would never get together for a chat. The misty forest gradually came into view. Soren's figure landed from the sky. There used to be a huge ancient tree here, so the forest was shrouded in some kind of power. In order to avoid exposing his identity, Soren chose to go on the ground. This was the Droll's territory, and also the gathering place of the Ents. There was a shepherd guardian here, and its level was as high as 36. A level 20 Droll, level 10 shepherd guardian, level 6 nature's guardian. It should still be sleeping now. However, if it were to wake up, even the saints would have to think twice before doing anything to it. The real overseer of the misty forest was the Droll cult. The Ents had a slow perception of time. If no one woke them up, they would probably have to wait until some huge change happened in the misty forest before they woke up from their slumber. Nature God system. The oldest natural gods did not need much faith because they were the embodiment of nature. The Ents were the creations of the natural gods, but they rarely appeared in the outside world. In the past few hundred years, the Ents had almost never left their gathering place. Their slumber was even longer than that of the dragons. Who is it? Soren heard the crisp voice of a child coming from behind him. After entering the misty forest, he slowed down his footsteps so that it would be easier for him to find the members of the Droll order. Soren turned around. He raised his eyebrows slightly and stared at the beautiful little thing that was only the size of his palm. He smiled and said, "Flower fairy?" Flower fairies. One of the embodiments of nature. In this world, most of the creatures with spirits were born in nature. They were like monsters in Eastern mythology. Most of the time, they were considered the embodiment of nature's beauty. The flower fairies were the weakest spirits creatures. Compared to the abilities of the water fairies and tree fairies, most of them with a challenge rating of less than 5 were very small. They were only good at some innate spell-like abilities and a small part of their charm ability. The little thing looked at Soren with vigilance and said, "You're trespassing into the territory of nature's spirits. You're not welcome here. Outsider. Get out of here quickly, or we'll attack." Buzz buzz buzz. The sound of bees flying was heard. Soren obviously found that there were other flower fairies nearby. These little things were born with the ability to hide. If they did not take the initiative to show themselves, even a very smart rogue would have a hard time finding them. These little things were very exclusive and naughty. Sometimes, they would play tricks on other people who entered the forest. Therefore, there were legends of fairies in some places. Basically, most of these things were done by the flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies. Naturally, Soren was not afraid. On the contrary, he was afraid of the little thing in front of him. She looked very fierce, but in fact, she was very weak. These nature's spirits were stronger than ordinary people. They did not have any advantage in front of high-grade professions, so they hid in the deepest part of the forest. "I don't mean any harm." Soren looked at the little thing in front of him. He did not have the intention to fight. He slowly said, "I'm looking for the Droll in the misty forest. I have an important message to tell them. If you don't mind, maybe you can take me to them." There was a saying in the tavern. That was a natural soul-type creature. They were born with +1 luck. Perhaps they were blessed by nature. If someone hurt them, their luck would be lowered by a little. There was no evidence for this saying, but many adventurers believed it. The flower fairies, tree fairies, and water fairies were very rare. Even if they encountered them, they would avoid conflict. the only thing that was certain was. That was, if you killed a certain number of nature's spirits, you would gain a hidden ability, nature's hatred. They were protected by nature. Although the tree fairies were often imprisoned by some powerful legendary figures because of their beautiful appearance, the ones who would actually kill them were very few people with twisted minds. The flower fairies were a companion species. Under normal circumstances, it was very difficult for them to leave their birthplace. As a kind of spirit creature, these nature's spirits were more related to the droll. But they trusted the tree ants the most. They were quite repulsed by any other race, whether it was humans, dwarves, or elves. Their own strength could solve a lot of problems. Although the flower fairies were very repulsed by Soren's identity as a human, because they were afraid of his strength, they still chose to help him find the droll. Most of the droll in the misty forest were of the nature element. There was once a case where a wild droll attacked a bear. So, most of the droll in this faction were very reclusive. It was very difficult to get along with them. Soren didn't plan on increasing their friendliness. His goal was to tell the droll about what had happened. The droll were all stubborn and powerful people. It was fine if they didn't know about this, but if they knew, they would definitely do something about it. The droll order had connections with each other. As long as this connection was connected, Soren wouldn't even need to do anything. The droll would go and cause trouble for the Queen of Spiders. For this kind of thing, Soren was happy to see it happen. Then there was the Silver Moon Council. It was an organization that served the Lady of Silvermoon. It was independent of the Silver Moon Church, and the Moonwalkers were their main members. It was a very powerful force. Soren suddenly remembered something. The death of the ancient red dragon seemed to have something to do with the Lady of Silvermoon. At that time, it was the incarnation of the Holy Spirit that killed the ancient red dragon. Who exactly did it? Soren couldn't be sure because there weren't many witnesses. But now that he thought about it, he realized that the trajectory of history didn't seem to have deviated too much. He just happened to be involved in one of the events. Chapter 621. The Misty Forest. This was a very vast primeval forest. Similar to it was the Lost Forest. Both of these places were places where special creatures lived. Soren's current location was full of ancient trees with intertwined roots. The trunks and branches in front of him formed the shape of a gate. It looked ordinary, but after walking in, it was another world. This place was called the Gate of the Forest. It was a gift left by the nature gods. It was also a world cultivated by the Ents. In other words, this place was an independent half-plane. It was a special half-plane built on the material plane and connected to the elemental plane with the misty forest as its foundation. This place was close to the center of the misty forest. The surrounding fog would affect the minds of others, and even make high-grade professions hallucinate. Usually, very few people could come here. This time, Soren also came here to see if he could get some special benefits. The Gate of the Forest was a special half-plane. Its existence was based on the roots of a huge ancient tree. The ancient tree of unknown age had died, but the roots still retained a huge amount of power. That was why the nature protector had turned this place into an independent demi-plane. Even the wild droll had to get the collective consent of the high-grade members of the council before he could enter. Because this was the place where many Ents slept, there was a great secret hidden inside the Gate of the Forest. This place was a large legendary level dungeon. The so-called dungeon was actually called by adventurers. There were many things in this world that couldn't be replicated. The concept of dungeon was just a joke. There were very few recorded dungeons. Basically, the level of the team challenge was above level 15. Moreover, most of the places that could be called dungeons were independent half-planes. For example, the city of Moder that Soren was now ruling, as well as the Wizard Tower in the Shadow Plane, the War Chess half-plane, the Secret Laboratory, and so on. These places were almost all legendary level dungeons. The Jungle Gate hadn't mutated yet. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, many places had been irreparably damaged because of the huge energy fluctuations. The battle of the gods had caused the material plane to be riddled with holes. Therefore, the jungle gate would undergo some terrible upheaval in the future, so that the Ents here were affected by the violent power. The raging fire from the Bator Inferno affected the Ents' minds, making them hate those who destroyed nature. In the future, the entire misty forest would become a dangerous zone with a challenge rating of more than 12. Of course, it was still relatively peaceful here. The forest gate had not been destroyed, and the structure of the half-plane was still very stable. This was one of the reasons why Soren came here personally. He wanted to sneak into the gate of the jungle. There were some things he was interested in. It was a mysterious item that could increase one's attributes. As mentioned before, there were very few things that could increase attributes in the entire material plane. Such things were very precious even to the gods. Coincidentally, there was such a thing inside the gate of the jungle, and it was extremely valuable to Soren. However, this place was already in chaos at that time. If he sneaked in now, he was still a little worried that he would alarm the nature's guardian with a profession level 36, but it was worth a little risk. Saint form. Rogue, divine domain. The rogue's divine domain could give Soren an extra sneak bonus. He carefully sensed his surroundings, and then slowly stepped into the gate made of branches in front of him. Space was distorted. In the blink of an eye, Soren had appeared in another space. Lush trees were everywhere in front of him. It was different from the destroyed and burnt dead trees in his memory. Now, the inside of the jungle gate was full of vitality. In the farthest distance of Soren's sight, there was an oak tree up to hundreds of meters high. This was an oak sage with a challenge rating of 21. It was also one of the guardians left behind by the nature gods. Ents. This was a special-shaped life species. Although they rarely appeared in the eyes of others, they still retained some extremely powerful creatures. Ents could also advance into professions. If Soren remembered correctly, the sleeping oak sage in front of him, its profession level was level 10 droll, level 10 Ent shepherd, level 5 oak sage, level 1 nature's guardian. Its total profession level was 26, and its challenge rating was 21. The Ents would receive gifts from nature as time passed. Many of them were born with the abilities of druids and tree shepherds. If they didn't have obvious weaknesses, they would be even more challenging to defeat. It was very quiet inside the gate of the jungle. There weren't many animals living here, only countless ancient trees. Ordinary people would feel like they were drunk on oxygen when they came here. Most of the trees in front of him were oak. Oak was one of the trees that could easily produce Ents. Relying on his god-level perception, Soren could easily find at least a dozen Ents with a monster level of 10 or above nearby. A clear river flowed down from the mountains in the distance. Soren carefully avoided the perception of the Ents, and then gradually went deeper into the gate of the jungle. This place had not been destroyed by the war, so the map in his memory was useless. In front of him was still a quiet and peaceful paradise. The Ents were quietly sleeping here. Haha. Stop it. Tarindi. If you continue to be naughty, I'll get angry. Crisp laughter came from the front. Soren vigilantly hid in the shadows, and then slowly approached. There were 3 beautiful figures in front of him. They looked a bit like elves, wearing beautiful red, yellow, and green dresses. At this moment, they were playing by the river. Their graceful bodies were filled with an indescribable charm. Ents. One of the residents of the gate of the jungle. If the war had not spread here, then most of the Ents here had not died, so this should be the place where most of the Ents lived in the material plane. They were the companions of the ancient trees, beautiful children born of nature. The Ents could not leave their companions for too long, so the ancient trees that they relied on should be nearby. Soren quietly watched for a while, and did not disturb these beautiful Ents. Instead, he continued to go deeper into the gate of the jungle along the river. In the deepest part of this place. It was the place where the guardians of nature slept. There was a special pool left from ancient times, and the essence of life would be born in it. The outside world was used to calling it the water of life. This was Soren's goal. It was a special item that could permanently increase one's lifespan, and an additional 1 point of constitution. Soren's constitution was now 24 points. As his profession level increased, it became harder to obtain attribute points. If he could get the water of life in advance, then he could directly obtain the ability of epic constitution. Moreover, lifespan and eternal youth may be nothing to the gods, but for other creatures, it was priceless. As the incarnation of the gods, the only thing that could threaten Soren here was the powerful guardians of nature. Chapter 622. The oak sage had a wide range of perception. In fact, many of these nature guardians had dug their roots deep into the ground. The entire half-bit wall had a direct connection with them. It was like a kingdom managed by them. The nature guardians here had the same ability as the tower spirit of the war chest bit wall, number 13. If Soren just sneaked in, it would be better, but if there was a battle or destruction of the environment, then the ancient tree guardians here could easily find his traces. Tree spirits, flower spirits, water spirits. Soren saw many beautiful figures here. They lived quietly in this paradise, almost living a carefree life. But all this would not last for long. The devils of the Baator Inferno and the demons of the abyss have always liked these natural souls because they were the embodiment of the beauty of nature. They only needed to slightly distort the power of the soul, and the power of these natural souls could be more useful. The most basic point was that whether it was flower spirits, water spirits, tree spirits, etc., the high-grade devils of the Baator Inferno and the high-grade demons of the abyss could easily turn them into lustful demons and succubus. This kind of transformation was quite cheap. Because the two had a very high compatibility in soul, it only took a little bit of power to turn them into lustful demons and succubus. So after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the jungle gate was destroyed and became an independent world. There were still a certain number of lustful demons and succubus wandering here. These were the remaining souls that were distorted and transformed. One was the beauty of kindness, the other was the beauty of evil. Soren didn't want to change anything, and he didn't have the ability to change the world. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis was destined to be unstoppable. He was lucky to be able to protect Mordor City after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. The closer he got to the inside of the jungle gate, the taller the trees became. Here were all ancient trees of war, which were basically oak. After they were activated, their combat power was far greater than others. Rumbling footsteps could be heard. A giant maple tree appeared in Soren's line of sight. It seemed to be about 20 meters tall, and there were traces of a human on its body. It walked slowly through the dense forest, carefully paying attention to the saplings under its feet. From time to time, it would stop and whisper something in the ancient and slow language of the Treants. It held a special tool in its hand and occasionally sprinkled a drop of water. Then, a big tree would grow crazily and take root in the depths of the earth at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the legendary water of vitality. It was a special item created by the wise one of the ancient trees. Its effect was not as exaggerated as the water of life, but it could be used to heal injuries and accelerate the growth of the ancient trees. The water of vitality was a rare item that was relatively easy to obtain. The wise maple tree walked for about a few hundred meters. Then, it seemed to have discovered something. It stopped in front of a tall oak tree. As if it felt some kind of power, it poured all the water of vitality on the oak tree. Then, many roots grew out of the oak tree, and its whole body became bigger and bigger. A smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the maple tree sage. He said in a gentle and slow voice, "Slow down. Slow down. Don't rush. Take root in the earth. Deeper. Even deeper." A low incantation could be heard. The wise maple tree sage in front of him was casting a spell. There was a spell in the wizard school that could only be cast by high-grade wizards and above. At this moment, the spell cast by the wise maple tree was the tree sage. It was a legendary creature that took on the role of tree shepherd. This was its daily activity. As an ancient treant, they were almost aloof from worldly affairs. Their daily task was to cultivate the forest, and then choose the ancient trees with enough vitality. With the help of the tree sage spell, they slowly turned them into new treants. They had been doing this kind of work for thousands of years. So in this kingdom, there were more than 2 digits of legendary ancient trees and tens of thousands of treants with a challenge rating of 5 and above. Only the army of the bottomless abyss and the Bator Inferno had the ability to destroy such a kingdom. The tree sage succeeded. The oak tree in front of him had the outline of a human. It moved slowly, and then fell into a deep sleep again. The treants were rarely active. Even if they were part of the ancient tree guardians, they would still grow like trees. As time passed, their strength would gradually increase. This process might be slow, but it had already been going on for a long time. The wise maple tree had completed its task for today. The birth of a treant was not easy. Even if it was a legendary creature, it could only cultivate one treant at a time. The wise maple tree came to a high slope. Then it stuck its roots into the ground, and its whole shape changed. In the end, it turned into a huge ancient tree. It needed to rest. The water of vitality was the essence of nature that it cultivated. Only with enough water of vitality could it complete its task of cultivating an ancient tree. Soren's target was not the water of vitality. He carefully sneaked in from the side. The nearby forest was guarded by this maple tree sage, and the entire gate of the jungle was divided into its own territory. Every region was guarded by a legendary level tree shepherd. Soren followed the path according to his memory. On the way, he saw a golden oak tree. It was a nature's guardian. The Trent's highest profession. Nature's guardians were basically high-grade legendary creatures. Their profession could reach level 25 or higher. Most of the nature's guardians were promoted from droll to treant shepherds, and then from treant shepherds to nature's guardians. They had the power to control trees. Any plant was their weapon. When needed, they could awaken the entire forest. As he got closer, Soren could feel a strong presence of life. This was a very ancient power. There were only a few places in the universe that could produce the water of vitality. The jungle gate in front of him was one of the 2 places in the material plane. The ancient tree guardians. Inside the jungle gate, there were more and more ancient tree guardians. If it wasn't for Soren's proficiency in stealth, he would have had to fight countless battles. The treants did not allow other creatures to come close. I feel it. Soren couldn't help but slow down. He sensed the traces of life around him. The thing he wanted should be right in front of him. Such a strong presence of life could not be concealed. There was a huge root on the ground, but there was no matching tree in front of him. Judging from the size of the root, an ancient tree that could produce such a large root would be at least 10,000 meters tall. It was as tall as the Himalayas. This was something left behind from ancient times. The water of vitality that Soren needed was right in front of the root. There was a pool that could produce the purest essence of life. Chapter 623. The closer he got to the inside of the jungle gate, the more luxuriant the trees around him became. Soren even saw some oaks and maples with golden leaves. These ancient trees had existed for a long time. They were all hundreds of meters tall, and their branches and leaves were quite lush. Judging from the perception of the gods, these ancient gods had a strong breath of life. This meant that they were all animated treants, and there was no lack of ancient tree-wise ones whose strength was close to the legendary level. They were the real guards inside the gate of the jungle. Even a legendary level adventurer team would not be able to break through their defense line. There was a special layer of security here. Under normal circumstances, even Soren would have a hard time breaking through, but he had a piece of equipment that was almost divine for rogues. That was the anti-detection cloak. There was a defensive enchantment set up by the guardians of nature here. Whether it was flying in the sky, running on the ground, or trying to sneak close, all would be discovered by them. The biggest function of the anti-detection cloak was to avoid any detection spells. This was also the reason why Soren dared to come here. Otherwise, even if he was a saint, it was unlikely that he could escape safely from the siege of a large group of legendary Ents. Shadow Realm. Shadow Leap. As he got closer to the warning circle of the ancient trees, Soren chose the safest way to enter. His figure instantly escaped into the shadow plane, and then with the help of the power of space, he jumped over the range of the spell and directly appeared in the shadow of the rock more than 100 meters away. This was the power that legendary rogues relied on to come and go without a trace. A huge root appeared in front of him. Soren reached out and pressed on it. He could feel the life essence slowly flowing away. The speed of the loss was not very fast, but the life essence it had was too large. Even after thousands of years, the life essence that flowed away not only gave birth to the jungle gate, but also continued to nourish the entire space. It was like the oldest demon corpse of Orbis in the bottomless abyss. Some huge corpses still existed in some places in the bottomless abyss. Just the exposed part was like a mountain. They were on the same level as the huge ancient god corpses floating in the astral plane. A golden oak tree appeared in front of him. Soren could sense that this was a powerful nature's protector. He only had 1 or 2 seconds to steal the water of life. If he took any longer, the nature's protector would seal off the space around him. By then, even Soren would not be able to escape. Get it and run. There was only one way for Soren to leave this demi-plane unscathed, and that was to use the power of the Shadow Realm to travel to the Shadow Realm, and then return to the material plane from there. This way, Soren wouldn't have to worry about being discovered even if the other party was a high-tier legendary guardian of nature. There was only one chance. Soren couldn't help but take a deep breath. His gaze locked onto a special pool in front of the roots of the ancient tree. It was a bit like the reincarnation pool of the Bator Inferno, but it was filled with pure positive energy. Shadow Leap. Soren's figure rushed forward and crossed the space in an instant. He appeared next to the pool in an instant, and then took away a lot of water of life in the blink of an eye. The whole pool was suddenly reduced by about a third. Thief! An angry roar sounded. The golden oak tree sage woke up in an instant. Its huge body stood up, and with a powerful force raging, the surrounding space suddenly showed signs of being sealed off. Dimensional Lock. A near-legendary spell. Almost without any casting action, the other party directly completed it. However, at this time, Soren had already noticed that something was wrong. He didn't greedily take a drop of water of life. Instead, he instantly activated the power of the Shadow Realm and directly crossed the space barrier into the Shadow Realm. The moment before he left, he felt a lot of powerful breaths burst out from all over the jungle gate. Towering trees stood up, and at least a dozen legendary ancient tree guardians locked onto this place. Damn thief! The angry roar echoed over the jungle gate, but at this time, there was no trace of Soren. He only appeared for less than a second from beginning to end. Even these powerful legendary ancient trees didn't find any trace of him, and they didn't even see his appearance clearly. Killing one person in 10 steps, leaving no trace for 1,000 miles. This was Soren's favorite sentence. But if a rogue wanted to do this, they had to reach the legendary realm. Everything in front of him was gray. Soren's figure appeared somewhere in the Shadow Realm. He wasn't very clear about where he was because the situation at the time was too dangerous. He was completely teleported here randomly. But it didn't matter. He could still return to the material plane through the Shadow Realm, and then it would be easy to determine the direction. Of course, he couldn't directly return to the material plane now because the Shadow Realm was connected to the material plane. If he returned to the material plane from here, he would probably appear directly in the misty forest. Now that he had stolen the water of life of the ancient Ents, it would be terrible if he returned to the misty forest. Soren was going to set off from here, go along a direction for dozens of kilometers, and then teleport back to the material plane. In this way, he would basically be out of the range of the misty forest. As long as he wasn't in the misty forest, those ancient trees couldn't do anything to him. Wisps of fog surrounded the area. It was impossible to determine the specific relationship between the material plane and the Shadow Realm, but what Soren saw now was also a dense forest. The trees growing in this forest were like reflections. They had twisted roots, and there was not even a trace of green. All that could be seen was a gray color. The trees in the shadow realm were also gray. There were many creatures in the shadow realm that mortals didn't know. Soren saw a twisted shadow, and it quickly targeted Soren. Arcane missile. An arcane missile directly took away the twisted shadow in front of him. They were souls that were accidentally reincarnated in the shadow realm, like twisted petitioners in the bottomless abyss. The twisted shadow began to retreat. Soren looked around and then flew towards the south. He had to leave the forest first. The shadow realm was as big as the material plane. Although it seemed very desolate here, he could still see some creatures. Occasionally, there would be some huge broken walls in sight, which were left behind from ancient times. The fallen gods, the ruins of the arcane empire, and the wizards of the shadow realm. There were many gods who left temples in the shadow realm. The arcane empire also developed this realm, so there were many broken buildings here. He walked for hundreds of kilometers. There were few towns in the shadow realm. The natives were too scattered, and the population of the entire shadow realm was less than 1,000th of the material plane. This was the territory of the Shadow Lord. As a mid-level god, he had a wider influence in the shadow realm. At the same time, his kingdom was also somewhere in the shadow realm. This was a natural convenience. Although he was also forced to leave his divine kingdom because of the Avatar crisis, he was closer to his divine kingdom than other gods. Shadow Realm. With the distortion of space, Soren returned to the material plane again. In front of him was still a vast forest. He used a flying spell to observe the surroundings and was surprised to find that he was already very close to his destination. This was the territory of the elves. It was near where he was chased by the followers of the god of hunting. It was about 100 kilometers from here to Autumn Fall. A long and towering mountain blocked the route, making it difficult for the orcs to reach here. At the same time, it was like a natural barrier that separated the elves from other races. Traditionally, going to the Elven Kingdom could only be done through the forest on the other side, which was hundreds of kilometers more. It's safe. After confirming that there was no danger, Soren took a little rest and began to check the properties of the water of life. Chapter 624. On the surface, the elixir of life looked very ordinary. It was just some relatively clear water. If one looked closely, they would faintly see a hint of emerald green. In fact, this was just an illusion created by the rich life energy. The water of life had a very rich power. It was the best healing treasure in the material plane. However, to completely change a person's physique, it needed a lot of it. The water of life had always been used by the Ents to cultivate the ancient Ents. This rich life energy could help speed up the Ents' advancement into Ents and nature's guardians. A row of data appeared in front of him: item type, water of life, fountain of youth, item grade, special wonder item description. The water of life has appeared in many special places in the material plane. It is the essence of nature, a treasure produced by heaven and earth. In the Eastern world, it is also called the fountain of youth. The ascetics believe that it has the ability to completely purify a person's physique and help them to reach the extraordinary realm. Therefore, the water of life is a priceless treasure in the Eastern world. There are very few places in the material plane where the water of life can be found. Effect: restore HP, regrow broken limbs, heal fatal injuries, strengthen physique, eternal youth, extend life. Special effect 1, restore HP. 1 milliliter of water of life can restore 10 HP. This effect is effective on most living creatures. Special effect 2, regrow broken limbs. The water of life can regrow broken limbs, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special effect 3, heal fatal injuries. The water of life can heal fatal injuries, but it must be used in a sufficient amount. Special effect 4, strengthen physique. Drinking more than 1 liter of water of life can permanently increase physique by 1 point. Note, this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. This effect can only be triggered once. Special Effect 5, Eternal Youth. The water of life can delay the aging of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the water of life will greatly slow down the aging speed. Special Effect 6, Extend Life. The water of life can delay the life of any living creature. Any creature that has drunk the water of life will greatly increase its life. Note, this effect must be triggered when the user is full of HP. The water of life. As an extremely rare special item, it had two special effects that could be triggered, namely, physique strengthening, and life extension. However, there were prerequisites for these two special effects to be triggered. That was, the user had to be in a fully recovered state. If the user wasn't at full health, the power of the water of life would only be used to heal injuries and would not trigger the effects of enhance physique and extend lifespan. Among them, physique enhancement had the highest requirement. It was extremely difficult to increase any attribute point. In terms of effect, the leaf that Soren had obtained before was rarer. Soren's HP was full, so he only needed to drink 1 liter of water of life. The amount that he had obtained was about 10 liters. If he used all of it to improve his physique, it would be enough to permanently increase the physique of 10 people by 1 point. Moreover, the effects of eternal youth and life extension would be triggered at the same time. The taste was light and a little sweet. Soren drank just the right amount, and a row of data popped up in front of his eyes. At the same time, a rich life force flowed into his limbs and bones. Use the special item, Water of Life. Triggered effect, physique strengthening. Permanent increase in physique by 1 point. Triggered effect, eternal youth. Appearance will not continue to age. Triggered effect, life extension. Lifespan will be greatly increased. Physique has reached 25 points. You have automatically mastered the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have the basic ability, Strengthen. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Epic Strengthen. You have acquired the legendary ability, Epic Physique. You have acquired part of the legendary ability, Damage Reduction. Ability Upgrade. Regeneration, Intermediate, upgraded to Advanced. Finally, there was the third attribute that had increased to 25 points. For a long time, Soren's attributes were far superior to others. However, this advantage did not have much of an advantage when facing the saints who were the incarnations of gods. This was because many of the incarnations of gods had an average attribute of more than 20 points. Some of the gods with great divine power even had an average attribute of more than 25 points. The life force of a saint was very tenacious. Soren's current life force was 385 points. For mortals and other legends, this was quite a terrifying amount of life force. However, for a saint who was the incarnation of a god, it was only at an ordinary level. Some of the warrior-type gods had a terrifying life force of more than 1,000 points. Under normal circumstances, Soren's life force had to exceed the level of an adult dragon to gain a certain advantage when fighting against other gods. Epic Physique, legendary ability. Your physique has far exceeded the range of a human. When you receive any damage, you will receive an additional point of damage reduction. Your test of endurance will permanently increase by 3 points. At the same time, you will receive an additional 10 points of HP. When you receive any tests related to physique, you will receive an additional point of epic value. The information of the two legendary abilities. After Soren increased his physique to 25 points, his accumulated endurance had surpassed most of the adult dragons. The strengthening of the regeneration ability did not have much of an effect on him now. Because of his saint form, he could use divine power to cast healing spells and heal his own injuries. However, the basic passive ability upgrade was still useful. Epic Strength. This was a very important survival ability. Every upgrade would increase his life force by an additional 30 points. Soren did not have much of an understanding of it yet. However, in the future, he might be able to use the ability points to directly obtain it. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to use a physique purification ritual on gods. Otherwise, Soren could use a physique purification ritual to increase his life force according to his current attribute points. Then, the increase in his survivability would be very huge. Along the way, Soren's original attributes gained less life force when he leveled up his profession. The ritual would allow him to recalculate his life force according to his current physique and maximize the potential of his body. If he could find the materials to perform the bloodline purification ritual. Then Soren's level 7 rogue, level 10 shadow dancer, level 10 wizard, and level 1 arcanist would be recalculated according to his 25 points of physique and the basic life force added by his profession. The bloodline ability of his body would be purified to the highest possible level. This ritual was very difficult. So far, Soren had only accidentally performed it once with the help of the dragon's blood. His goal was achieved. Soren gained 3 additional abilities. They were the legendary ability, epic physique, the special abilities, eternal youth, and life extension. These 2 abilities appeared in the passive abilities. Unfortunately, these abilities were useless to Soren, who was already a god. He was almost immortal, so these 2 abilities were more useful to mortals. He carefully put away the water of life. After gaining an additional point of physique, the water of life was less useful to him. However, it was still a priceless treasure to others. First of all, Vivian would definitely need it, but now he didn't know if he could give it to her. Soren was worried that she wouldn't grow up after drinking it. Then there was Gloria. The divination and prophecy abilities of the northern witches were the most harmful to their own lifespan. In theory, she was the one who needed it the most. As one of his closest women, Soren must leave enough for her. Then there was the portion reserved for the fallen witch and Princess Anna, and the portion that might be needed to make friends with the Princess Royal and the Eye of the North. In this way, Soren found that it was not enough. Because it was not easy to get this thing again, and there was not much stock in the entire material plane. If he wanted to go back and get some more, he would have to wait until the Avatar crisis. Chapter 625. It would not be easy to fight against the god of the hunt, Malor. There were no allies in this world for no reason. With the water of life in his hands, Soren was more confident in asking the Princess Royal for help. But all of this still depended on his next plan. He had prepared a lot of things to deal with the god of the hunt. Even including some things that he had to pay a price for. Before he really carried out the plan. Soren still had a very important thing to do, and that was to go to the Gobi Desert to meet some people. The attitude of these people was the key to all of Soren's next plans. If they were willing to help Soren, then Soren would not have to use the backup plan. But if they were not willing to help, then Soren could only rely on the backup plan to deal with the god of the hunt, Malor. These people were the paladins. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the paladins was very complicated. As a member of the Order faction, Soren was very appreciative of the paladins' behavior in maintaining order. But because good and evil were the opposite of each other, Soren had a fierce contradiction with the paladins in the way of doing things and the way of doing things. For a long time, Soren had always avoided any obvious conflict with the paladins, and even helped them several times. For example, he told them where the core material of the Holy Avenger was. And when he fought against the demigod vampire, although Soren's purpose was to get rid of a dangerous enemy once and for all, it was undeniable that he also saved the lives of the paladins. This time, Soren went to the Gobi Desert to meet them. From here, through the elven forest, he could quickly reach their place of cultivation by following the trade route of the east. Soren needed to meet them and test the paladins' attitude towards him, and then consider a small request. This small request was to borrow the Holy Avenger. That's right. Soren wanted to use the power of the Holy Avenger to get rid of the god of the hunt, Malor. As one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane, the Holy Avenger completely crushed all of Soren's equipment in all aspects. However, this weapon was not something he could possess. If anyone who wasn't a paladin took possession of this weapon, they would attract endless trouble. Soren could use the Holy Avenger. Even though the process was a little painful, and the damage to his mind was severe, it was undeniable that Soren could use the Holy Avenger to last through the entire battle with omnipotent hands. When fighting against the demigod vampire, this most powerful weapon in the material plane had already proved its power. Therefore, when Soren decided to deal with Malor, the god of the hunt, he immediately thought of this weapon. If he could use the Holy Avenger in battle, Soren's chances of victory would increase by at least 20%. This weapon could be said to have a unique advantage against Malor, the god of the hunt from the chaotic evil faction. With its high damage output and Soren's explosive power, if he could get the help of other strong players, he might be able to achieve the same level of dominance as he did in the previous battle. With the Holy Avenger in hand, Soren's reservation plan could be reduced by half. He might not even have to try to provoke conflicts between the god of the hunt and other gods. He just needed to avoid being besieged by the followers of the Church of the Hunt and find an opportunity to kill the god of the hunt. However, Soren couldn't figure out the paladin's attitude towards him, and he wasn't sure if they were willing to lend him this most important holy object. Therefore, he secretly provoked a conflict between the Church of the Hunt and the Church of the Suffering in advance. Wind and sand filled the sky. Soren's figure appeared outside the Gobi Desert. Because the Avatar crisis was coming, the route to the Eastern Kingdom had become very dangerous. The terrible climate change had buried many passing merchants, so not many people passed through the Desert of Death for the time being. The secret base of the Paladins couldn't be easily approached. If Soren encountered some idiot who cast a spell to detect his alignment, then things would be very awkward. Attack? Then do you still want to borrow the Holy Avenger? Don't attack. What if the other party was stubborn enough to attack Soren, this evil guy? So, the wisest choice was to first find someone Soren had met before, so as to avoid a direct conflict. The Paladins also knew how to be polite. If there was such a person who had contact with Soren in advance, the other Paladins should not cast a spell to detect his alignment. In terms of flexibility, these Paladins who lived in seclusion near the Gobi Desert were much easier to get along with than those of the Church of Glory. Those Paladins couldn't tolerate sand in their eyes. Who should he find? The ideal target was naturally the prison warden, who had a high status within the Paladin organization. However, Soren wasn't familiar with him, so his first target should be the young Paladin he saw in the City of Wealth. If he could get in touch with the Holy Avenger through him, and then find a way or even pay some price to borrow the weapon, then the next thing would be much easier. Find someone. This was a bit of a troublesome problem. However, the channel Soren could mobilize now was not what it used to be, and he soon learned the whereabouts of the Paladins. Arendelle. Since they had obtained an important part of the Holy Avenger, the most important thing for the Paladins now was naturally to repair this weapon. However, there were very few people in the entire material plane who could repair this weapon. One of the most powerful artifacts in the material plane, this was not a joke. Even the most skilled blacksmiths in the human kingdom couldn't repair the Holy Avenger even a little bit. Because this weapon was an artifact, there were remnants of great divine power on it. In other words, one must reach the level of being able to use divine power to repair this weapon. Looking at the entire material plane, there were very few people who could do this. Not only did they have to be able to use divine power, but they also had to be very skilled in magical weapons. There were only a few people who could do this. Arendelle's Princess Royal. There was no doubt that Princess Royal was very powerful as a divine warlock. At the same time, she was also the only person in the north who could easily use divine power. Secondly, Princess Royal was an advanced legendary spellcaster, so she had a very high understanding of alchemy and enchantment. The part found in the Underdark was Tyr's Eye. This thing was also an artifact-level material, and it wasn't something that could be casually embedded into it. The complicated process involved, as well as the price one had to pay, was enough to make anyone think twice before doing it. If he wanted to restore an incomplete artifact to its peak state, the amount of divine power needed to be consumed was enough to make Soren's teeth ache. So, unsurprisingly, the Paladin's progress in repairing the Holy Avenger did not have any progress, because Arendelle's Princess Royal was not willing to waste her precious divine power to help them. Therefore, the matter had been delayed until now. Chapter 626. The gentle evening breeze blew in his face. In the slums near the port of Arendelle, a group of half-grown children were gathered together. The sound of a sailor's horn came from the seaside, but the children didn't care at all. They gathered in a circle and focused on the front. From time to time, someone stood on the other side and imitated, posing a posture that was a bit like the sword form, horizontal slash. They were secretly learning combat skills. For these children who lived at the bottom, they didn't have much ambition. Their parents encouraged them to come here more in the hope that they could secretly learn something so that they wouldn't be bullied when they worked at the docks in the future. It was always good to know a few moves. On the other side of the slums was a cheap hotel with a shed for mules and horses on the side. The air was a little muddy, and the road outside was not muddy because of the prosperity of Arendelle, but it was inevitable that water would accumulate when it rained. This was the poorest area of Arendelle, but the people living here were not sallow and emaciated. At most, they were dressed shabbily. The paladins lived here for the time being. As representatives of the lawful good camp, many of them refused to enjoy life and firmly believed in their own dogma. Therefore, the paladins refused the accommodations arranged by the court of Arendelle and chose a cheap hotel, because although they held great power, they were not a wealthy group. A young paladin was teaching a half-grown child. There were other paladins watching nearby. His name was no longer important. Since leaving the City of Wealth, his beliefs had been tempered too much. Now, he was the user of the Holy Avenger. The paladins called him the Hand of Justice. Although he hadn't fully entered the realm of legends and had his own title, he was now very close to this step. In a very short period of time, he relied on his faith and will to surpass many of his companions. The warden also lived in this somewhat shabby little hotel. In the face of the fearful expression of the innkeeper, his dignified face always showed a smile as much as possible. Pity. Tolerance. Integrity. The paladins had a completely different attitude towards the noble class and the commoners. This attitude was just the opposite of other people. Ordinary people flattered the nobles when they came in contact with them and despised the lower class. Paladins, on the other hand, were the complete opposite. They treated the nobles harshly, but treated the commoners kindly and peacefully. From the perspective of the paladins, most of the nobles were evil, and their rule often made life difficult for ordinary people. All right. Let them practice on their own. Accompany me to Arendelle's palace later. We must see the Princess Royal again. The warden nodded slightly to the young paladin. He had witnessed the growth of this young man and watched him find his own path. The young paladin did not fall into a paranoid fanaticism. He firmly believed in justice and had his own understanding, so he finally chose justice, because he believed that justice could make the world better. The training stopped. The young paladin reached out and patted the apprentice's head. He smiled and said a few words, then turned and entered the inn. When he was trained as a saint samurai, he was also a child of this age. Now, so many years had passed in the blink of an eye, and he had touched the door of the legendary realm. Although he had made a vow not to marry and have children, he could not help but feel a trace of fatherly feeling towards this disciple. He was still very young. But his experience had made his face full of vicissitudes, and more of a settled perseverance. He began to understand the older paladins. A group of paladins walked towards the palace. From time to time, people saw them on the road. Ordinary people nodded slightly, merchants looked a little surprised, and even people who wandered in the gray area saw them. At most, they were a little worried and scared, and then hid. This was not the City of Wealth. This was the richest and most prosperous country in the north of the continent. This was Arendelle, ruled by the Princess Royal. Arendelle also had its gray area. But the commoners here would not choose to ask for help from the paladins, because although their lives were poor, it was not to the point of being unbearable. More often than not, they chose to believe in the laws of Arendelle. The rule of the Princess Royal maintained the clarity of the laws of Arendelle, and there were naturally laws to punish those who were too evil. Ordinary people hardly needed the help of the paladins, and they knew that the price of such help was too heavy. A city. A country. To judge the extent of their civilization, the simplest point was to see if they could accommodate the existence of the paladins. The City of Wealth could not do it. But Arendelle did it. Another place that could do this was called Mordor. Although the residents often observed them with indifferent eyes, they still tolerated the appearance of the paladins. The law. The most similar thing between Mordor and Arendelle was that they both had strict laws. The commoners of Arendelle maintained respect for the paladins, and the nobles maintained politeness to the paladins. The former did not regard them as a light of hope, and the latter did not regard them as a threat to themselves. Because under the rule of the Princess Royal, the nobles strictly fulfilled their rights and obligations. They did not think that the paladins needed to judge them. They were just doing what the nobles should do, so they were not afraid of the paladins in their hearts, and naturally there was not so much hostility. Outside the palace. There was no doubt that the warden returned without success again. The Princess Royal had an absolutely noble status in Arendelle. If she did not want to see these paladins, then they could not see her anyway. The warden did not want to give up so easily. He knew that his request was a bit excessive and may cause the Princess Royal's power to be seriously damaged, but he also knew that the Princess Royal was one of the few people in the material plane who could repair the Holy Avenger, so he would never give up easily. Continuous refusal. This made the other younger paladins a little dissatisfied. They believed that repairing the Holy Avenger was a righteous and sacred thing, and the Princess Royal should never refuse such a thing. If it weren't for the prosperity and peace of Arendelle, they would have thought that the Princess Royal did not understand what a righteous cause was. The paladins easily fell into paranoia. Especially when justice filled their minds, fanaticism would cause many things to be seen as unjust. The warden needed to guide them and guide the way for these young people. The Princess Royal was willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a favor, and not willing to help them repair the Holy Avenger, which was a duty. You should not use morality to kidnap others, otherwise, you would also be kidnapped by morality. The paladins needed guidance. They were not a bunch of stubborn people from the Church of the Lord of Light, and the warden had always sneered at their education methods. The young paladins always relied on their passion to join their ranks, but only after experiencing various setbacks could they grow into real paladins. He had already guided a hand of justice, and the warden hoped that there would be more young people like this in the future. Because he felt the aura of the coming turmoil. Outside the palace. A carriage team gradually approached, and then a tall and handsome man with blonde hair appeared. He was the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom, and recently he wanted to go to the palace of Arendelle whenever he had nothing to do. The warden had seen him 3 times at the gate because he had always wanted to visit the Princess Royal. As before, the second prince of the Falcon Kingdom looked a little surprised and uneasy when he saw them, and then pretended to pass by from the side as if nothing had happened. This guy did not even dare to pass by in front of the warden. There was no doubt that he was not confident when facing the paladins. Once again, they returned without success. The warden could not help but feel a little tired. The Princess Royal had almost nothing to ask of the paladins, and naturally the paladins could not provide anything in return. Power? With the strength of the Princess Royal, there were almost no mortals in the material plane who could defeat her. Wealth? Not to mention whether the paladins had money or not, there were not many people in the entire material plane who could be richer than the Princess Royal. It was estimated that only the ruler of the city of Mordor could be comparable. There was no way to provide anything to the Princess Royal, and naturally the paladins could not ask for anything. Chapter 627. A thin figure shrouded in a grey cloak entered Arendelle. After all, Soren had crossed half of the continent. Even with the power of the gods, he was delayed for a day or two. Taking advantage of the night, he entered the city of Arendelle and was ready to see what the paladins were up to. For a long time, Soren's attitude towards the paladins was very complicated. It was not impossible for the two to cooperate, but the possibility was not very high. If there was a choice, Soren would certainly not want to have too much contact with the paladins, but now he had to try. Order evil and order good. In Soren's mind, the truest point was that order was more important than good and evil, and chaos was the real disaster. It was because of this point of view that he would repeatedly help the paladins. As an adventurer who had experienced the most turbulent period of the Avatar crisis and had died once, he had to go through the reincarnation of the Styx and then climbed all the way to the legendary realm. Soren was very clear that the most terrible thing about the Avatar crisis was not the gods fighting, but the complete destruction of the order and rules of many planes and worlds. When the order that had lasted for a long time inside the multiverse was destroyed, the terrible chaos would lead to crazy destructive power that was crazier than all the gods fighting. Soren was a person who advocated order. For him, good and evil were simply two sides of the world. If the devils were to rule the world, they would inevitably use iron and cruel means to control the world and enslave other races. But if the demons were to rule the world, then what would be left in the end would only be a broken ruin. The truest point of Soren's mind was that order was higher than good and evil. Whether it was order evil or order good, in the future after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, they might become his help and allies. The reason was simple. They needed to maintain order in that turbulent period, and only order, whether good or evil, could minimize the damage as much as possible. This was a bold attempt. For Soren, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis was imminent, and it was very necessary to make such a bold attempt. If he succeeded, he might be able to rope in more help in the future. Even if he failed, he would only lose a little time. Considering that he had once helped the Saint Samurai, these people probably wouldn't attack him yet. Chaos would destroy everything. Now, the death rate of the entire continent had increased significantly, and various races had begun to collide fiercely because of the collapse of order. He couldn't feel all of this in Mordor City, but Soren had already noticed it when he went to Amber City and Whiterun City. This kind of turmoil would sooner or later affect the South Coast. In the future, when the terrible era of chaos arrived, any power of order was worth contacting. Port District. It was quite easy to find a group of paladins in a city because they were too conspicuous. Soren only needed to ask a passerby to find out where they were. Under the light of dusk. A young Saint Samurai was teaching a disciple, and next to him were other Saint Samurai. They were wearing slightly mottled and worn armor, and they looked completely different from the Saint Samurai in silver and dazzling armor he saw in the City of Wealth. The latter looked more like the embodiment of light and justice, while the former was like a lonely guardian who had gone through the vicissitudes of life and could only try to maintain justice in the world. This was also an important reason why Soren was willing to get close to them. Holy Avenger. Pale Justice. These two most powerful artifacts in the material plane were weapons that only Saint Samurai could use. It just so happened that the sacred warrior organizations that were in charge of these two divine weapons had surprisingly maintained a peaceful heart. There was a trace of humility and reverence in their hearts, unlike the sacred warriors of the Church of the Lord of Glory, many of whom were unable to communicate with each other. Under the afterglow of the setting sun. When the young Saint Samurai saw Soren's figure, he was suddenly stunned. He still couldn't see Soren's face, but he remembered the cloak on Soren's body. Long time no see. Soren nodded slightly, and after seeing that the other party didn't have any hostility, he slowly said, "It seems that you've become stronger. I want to see the warden." Even the gods would maintain appropriate respect for high-grade legendary figures. This was true even for his followers. Even after death, such figures would still be valued in the kingdom of God. They would be the most solid foundation of the kingdom of God. Under normal circumstances. If a legendary figure who believed in them died, many times, they would send their own oracles to pick up the soul in person. If the other party's belief was pious enough and could attract the attention of the gods, then it was normal for the gods' incarnations to pick up the soul. "Your Excellency, please come with me." The young Saint Samurai might not be young anymore. After all, after so many experiences, his vicissitudes of life could no longer be concealed. He could probably guess Soren's camp. Because, justice, had become his belief, his perception of the outside world had become more and more obvious. In order to prevent the other Saint Samurai from doing something stupid like throwing a detection camp, he quickly bowed slightly to Soren to show his respect for the person in front of him, and then took him into the hotel. The Saint Samurai around were surprised. After all, the Hand of Justice was also a quasi-legendary figure. Only those who were legendary and above could make him bow to show his respect and call him, Your Excellency. Soren seemed to be a rogue. It was well known. Rogues were rarely good people. Rogues like Robin Hood were only exceptions, so they were wise enough not to delve into it. Soren soon met the warden. This powerful legendary Saint Samurai, who had advanced into the legendary class, Judge, was also surprised by Soren's arrival. However, after all, the parts of the Holy Avenger were found through him, so the warden was just surprised and had no other emotions. For a legendary figure to come to him in person, there must be something very important, maybe even related to the Holy Avenger. This was just his personal intuition, because the warden told him where the important part of the Holy Avenger, Eye of Tyr, was. The warden quickly let the others go out, but he left the Hand of Justice here. Obviously, he was ready to train him as his successor. I'm here for one thing. Soren looked at the two Saint Samurai in front of him and felt a little pressure in his heart. It was not because of the difference in strength, but because of the identity of the two Saint Samurai. He thought for a moment and was ready to tell the truth, but he had to hide something. So he went straight to the point and said, I'm going to deal with the god of the hunt, Mailer. Don't ask me why I want to deal with him. He's my enemy, and I want to kill him. It's that simple. This was the first sentence, and it seemed a little too imposing. The first sentence was to deal with a god, which directly shocked the two in front of him. He thought for a moment. Soren found that he had not yet revealed his identity, so he took off his hood and said the second sentence, I'm Soren. I'm Soren. Just this sentence alone was enough. The legendary rogue who was known by everyone in the material plane, the powerful pirate king who ruled the three seas, built the prosperous city of Mordor single-handedly, and had a high status on the south coast. He was the idol of the rogues, and now he had become the faith of many rogues. The reason was simple. He became a god. There were only 4 words in the last paragraph, but the weight of these 4 words seemed to be a bit heavy. Just the sentence, I'm Soren, had already stunned the two Saint Samurai in front of him. They were both legendary figures, or close to legendary figures. But there was no doubt that the real legendary figure in the material plane in recent years, the legend of the legends, was undoubtedly Soren, who rose rapidly in Mordor and successfully became a god with the clergy of half-elf and rogue. The body of a god. At this moment, the two Saint Samurai were a little confused. They had no time to think about whether Soren was in the evil camp, because they were now full of one thought, that a god had appeared in front of them in person. My god. I actually saw the body of a god. Chapter 628. Under the dim moonlight. Soren's figure left the inconspicuous hotel. At the moment, it was very quiet outside, and only the barking of dogs could be heard occasionally. He made an agreement with the warden. Although he couldn't understand why Soren could use the Holy Avenger, in order to completely restore the power of this artifact, he decided to make a deal with Soren. The warden was not one of those inflexible paladins. After the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, he quickly became one of the leaders of the paladin organization, the Holy Avenger. As a figure who could rise at such a time as the Avatar crisis, the warden must have something different from other paladins. This could be seen from the other paladins trained by him. These paladins were obviously more rational and calm. The brilliance of the moon was getting dimmer. Just after the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, today's moon suddenly became a little dim. It looked as if it was gray and covered with a shadow. Soren was not sure whether the Lady of Silvermoon had fallen from the sky, but this lady was the core key to the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. She was one of the oldest goddesses and used to be one of the most powerful goddesses. The Lady of Night and the Lady of Silvermoon. One was an evil god with great divine power, and the other was a good god with great divine power. These two goddesses were like the twins of fate, fighting for countless years. The Lady of Night had always wanted to completely defeat the Lady of Silvermoon, and the Lady of Silvermoon also wanted to defeat the Lady of Night. Their struggle could no longer be counted. The great divine power of the goddess of magic came from the battle of these two goddesses. In the most ancient times, the battle of the two goddesses led to the chaos of mysterious energy, and thus the birth of the first generation of the goddess of magic. They were older than Mother Earth because they were the embodiment of the original light and darkness. A lot had happened during this period. For some reason, the Lady of Silvermoon's power declined greatly. At her worst, she was only at the level of minor divine power. However, she was, after all, an ancient and powerful god. Under the protection of the goddess of magic, the Lady of Silvermoon quickly retrieved a part of her power and restored it to the level of lesser divine power. Then, for hundreds of years, she successively intervened in the fields of pregnancy, breastfeeding, motherhood, and so on. Finally, she successfully restored the power of intermediate divine power. The Lady of Silvermoon no longer needed the protection of the goddess of magic, but with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the two goddesses once again collided violently. This must be mentioned because according to Soren's memory, Lillian, the Witch of Dread, died in the hands of the Silvermoon Lady. She was the most ancient deity. It was impossible to calculate the time of its birth. Many legends were too old, and it was hard to say whether they were true or not. One thing that Soren could be sure of was that the power of the Lady of Silvermoon would change with the elemental tide. Sometimes the power was very weak, and sometimes it was very strong. The goddess of magic was created by the battle between her and the Lady of Night. The battle between the two goddesses produced a mysterious explosion. The Lady of Silvermoon gave up part of her power for the sake of more positive energy, which led to the emergence of the first generation of mages and obtained part of their power. Therefore, the relationship between the goddess of magic and the Lady of Silvermoon had always been very close. This goddess maintained a good relationship with many gods. When she was at her weakest, she once sought the protection of the goddess of love and beauty. She also had a good relationship with the goddess of joy. Now, the representative of the Light Camp, the Lord of Light, had always been her staunch ally. She also had an ally, the Dark Maiden. That was the goddess whose holy emblem was a naked drow girl in the moonlight. She had long fallen in the hands of her mother, the Queen of Spiders, Lolth. This goddess also had a close relationship with the Lady of Silvermoon, so the Lady of Silvermoon and the Queen of Spiders also maintained a hostile camp. However, the biggest enemy of the Lady of Silvermoon was still the Lady of Night. She was Lady of the Night, Goddess of the Lost, Goddess of Darkness, and so on. This ancient Lady of the Night was a goddess who liked secrets. She was only intermediate divine power, at her weakest, but because of the last turbulent period, she plotted to kill the god of caves in the Underdark and accepted the believers of this god. Then, the Lady of Night created the Shadow Weave. Through a series of alliances and secret confrontations with the Queen of Spiders, the Lady of Night and the Queen of Spiders entered the realm of greater divine power at the same time. If there was anyone other than the Queen of Spiders that Soren was afraid of, there was no doubt that the Lady of Night was one of them. This ancient goddess was also very powerful. As mentioned earlier, the cat and dance goddess almost fell into the deepest depths of lust, which led to a serious deviation in her camp. This was the work of the Lady of Night. The Lady of Night rarely appeared in the material plane. Most of the time, she would only appear in those dark dances, communion meetings, and grand dark ceremonies full of tempting lust and lust. The fall of the first generation of the god of Thebes led to the fall of the shadow divinity. Although the Mistress of the Night maintained an alliance with the Lord of Shadows on the surface, she was still secretly plotting to kill the Lord of Shadows and reclaim the priesthood of the Shadow Domain. The Avatar crisis broke out. The fall of the goddess of magic led to the return of powerful forces. Before the birth of a new goddess of magic, the two forces that directly led to the birth of the goddess of magic gradually returned to the Lady of Silvermoon and the Lady of Night. So, These two goddesses gradually recovered the great power of the ancient times, and because of the conflict between them, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis became more intense. Everything happened for a reason. Soren had been in this world for so long, and he had thought more than once about whether he could stop the terrible destruction of the Avatar crisis. But when he gradually figured it out, he found that nothing could be stopped in front of the torrent that swept across the multiverse. His weakest personal strength could not change the general trend of the time of troubles. This was not caused by a single factor. Many reasons were concentrated at this moment, and then because of this moment, they collectively broke out. These reasons would not break out, and they would continue to exist. The outbreak was just because the energy storm ignited everything, providing an opportunity for all the grievances to be resolved. The light dimmed. Suddenly, the silver moon in the sky seemed to have lost its brilliance. Night enveloped the whole world, and the sleeping people did not feel anything. But Soren suddenly stopped. He felt that the moonlight in the sky had lost its spirituality, like a gaze that had been watching the world for a long time, and suddenly disappeared without a trace. The Lady of Silvermoon fell. Although it seemed that there was no abnormality, Soren was very sure that the Lady of Silvermoon had fallen to the mortal world. After the goddess of magic fell to the mortal world, the second core figure of the Avatar crisis also fell to the mortal world. Soren stood in place for a long time. To be honest, he did not know much about the Lady of Silvermoon, and he did not pay much attention to her at the beginning, mainly because Soren liked to be active in the Underdark and did not know the specific situation of the gods in the surface world. On the contrary, for the gods in the Underdark, especially the old rival of the Lady of Silvermoon, the Lady of the Night, Soren remembered very clearly. If he remembered correctly, the basic profession levels of the Lady of the Night were Rogue 10, Shadow Dancer 10, Assassin 10, Warlock 10, Shadow Lord 10. Health points, 968. There were also believers of the Lady of the Night in the Underdark. As a god of the same level as the Queen of Spiders, it was difficult for Soren not to remember her information. Moreover, the Lady of the Night also controlled the Shadow Weave, so most people who had been in the underground world would remember her. It was very interesting. This goddess was also an advanced Shadow Dancer, but she had also advanced to Shadow Lord, and her strength was still too terrifying compared to Soren. Chapter 629. The bright white moonlight gradually recovered. However, the light seemed a little hollow. Soren suddenly felt a very powerful vibration from somewhere in Arendelle. This attracted his attention. His figure landed on the roof with a light leap, and then he quickly approached the front. As the distance gradually narrowed, Soren found that the place where the vibration of the divine power came from was actually the palace of Arendelle. On the observatory on the side of the palace, there was a very powerful burst of power. Is it Princess Royal? Soren couldn't help but have a little doubt in his heart, and directly rushed over with Fly. No matter what, Princess Royal was still in an alliance with him. Something must have happened to such a vibration of divine power. Haha. There was a strange chuckle. As soon as Soren approached the palace of Arendelle, Princess Royal found his trace. An incarnation made of ice and snow appeared. She glanced at Soren faintly and said with a little surprise, "It's you?" There was another person present. The royal palace of Arendelle had been set up with powerful security magic by the elder princess. After all, her enemies were not ordinary. The chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Soren recognized the drow priestess with a coquettish face and a long whip at a glance. The other party's identity was too easy to recognize. Only the chosen of the three gods would use that kind of strange whip. One was the priestess of the Queen of Spiders, one was the admirer of the Queen of Succubus, and the last was the chosen of the Maiden of Pain. Princess Royal had always had a hostile relationship with Winter Maiden, and Maiden of Pain happened to have a close relationship with Winter Maiden. That was how the previous dispute had arisen. "You dare to come here?" Princess Royal's expression was as cold as frost. She stared at the drow priestess in front of her with murderous eyes. With a wave of her hand, ice and snow filled the surroundings. Ice prison. A crisp laughter sounded, and the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared in place, and then appeared 100 meters away. She glanced at Soren with some fear, and then said playfully, "It seems that a lot of things have happened to you during this time. I just came here to tell you that Winter Maiden has returned from the astral plane. It won't be long before she comes to see you. Haha. I won't stay here and disturb you. I'll go first." With a magic aura, the priestess of the Maiden of Pain disappeared. She was afraid of Princess Royal, otherwise, she wouldn't run away. Winter Maiden? The Princess Royal couldn't help but frown slightly. She thought of the god that she had exiled to the astral plane. Why did the chosen of the maiden tell her this? Didn't she maintain an alliance with Winter Maiden? These two evil gods once served the Storm Lord, the powerful god believed in the Amazon region. Later, because the Storm Lord stole the divine power of Winter Maiden, it directly led to the breakdown of this fragile divine relationship. The gods under the Storm Lord began to be disloyal, and Winter Maiden and the Maiden of Pain also formed an alliance. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, God of the Hunt, Sea Goddess, and Storm Lord. These 5 gods once belonged to the same divine system. The first 4 gods, whose strength ranged from minor divine power to intermediate divine power, all served the Storm Lord for a period of time. Their alliance was interesting. On the one hand, they maintained cooperation, and on the other hand, they schemed against each other. The evil camp liked this. The Maiden of Pain used to be a member of the Dark Gods, and served the former god of massacre with the Lady of Poison. That was the bloodline source of the Son of Massacre. But since the death of the god of massacre in the last turbulent year, these two goddesses gradually surrendered to the power of the Lady of the Night. However, after the return of the god of tyranny, the Maiden of Pain's loyalty to the Lady of the Night began to waver. What happened next was very interesting. The god of tyranny fell during the Arcane Empire and was replaced by the Dread Lord, the bloodline source of the Son of Fear. The Maiden of Pain's master changed again and became the god of the Storm Lord. The Storm Lord seized the power of Winter Maiden, and the entire divine system collapsed again. The Sea Goddess rose to become a great divine power. The Maiden of Pain, Winter Maiden, and the god of the Hunt formed an alliance, and then the situation continued until now. The relationship between the gods had always been like this. The position of the gods of the evil camp was almost only related to interests. Soren's mind instantly went through the things in his memory. The next moment, he realized one thing in his heart, that was, the frost chaos was about to break out. The Avatar Crisis. When this unprecedented period of turmoil broke out, the chaos was not just in 1 or 2 places. When Soren came to the Frost Kingdom through the Icewind Valley, he remembered that the frost chaos was about to break out, so he decided to go to the outer islands. Now, Winter Maiden had returned. The Maiden of Pain's chosen had also appeared in Arendelle. All the signs indicated that the frost chaos was likely to be brewing. Winter Maiden, Maiden of Pain, the god of the hunt. For a moment, all the clues in Soren's mind suddenly connected together. He realized something in an instant. That was, if he could kill the god of the hunt and then disintegrate the conspiracy of Winter Maiden and Maiden of Pain, then, would the frost chaos not break out? If the frost chaos did not break out, then the northern kingdoms centered on Arendelle would not fall into war. In history, this was also a heavily affected area of the Avatar Crisis. If the Princess Royal did not mysteriously disappear, the trajectory of history would be deviated. The turmoil of the Avatar Crisis would be reduced by Soren to some extent. For the first time. This was the first time that Soren felt that he could change the future. Although he could not interfere with the trajectory of the gods above the intermediate divine power, if he could destroy the allies of these weak gods, then the trajectory of the Avatar Crisis would have been deviated. What are you doing here? Princess Royal looked at Soren with a complicated expression. On the one hand, she was very reluctant to Soren's close relationship with Princess Anna. On the other hand, she had to admit that Soren's growth was too amazing. At the beginning, he was just an ordinary adventurer. But now he had become a god with the help of the half-elf and the rogue clergy. Although the Princess Royal still had the advantage in terms of strength, Soren's status as a true god was far higher than hers. If it wasn't for the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, with the ability of Soren as a true god, he would be far more powerful than Princess Royal after switching to the form of a god. No one knew why. Soren had always felt that Princess Royal gave him a lot of pressure, so he looked at her and said slowly, "I have prepared a gift for you. I also have something to discuss with you." Icewind Valley, North. As dawn approached, a part of the forest in the south suddenly began to wither, like a plant plague. The roots of the trees rotted away, yellow leaves fell, and the green flowers and plants all withered. In just a short while, the entire forest had died, and the smell of decay permeated the air of the forest. Chapter 630. Withering was spreading like a disease. In the blink of an eye, the forest to the north of Icewind Valley had completely lost its vitality. Along with the light of a spell, a teleportation gate appeared near the Lizardman's swamp. This was a temporary portal. When the portal across space gradually stabilized, figures wearing gray robes appeared one by one. Among these people, there were humans, lizard men, and even elves, as well as some creatures made of twisted roots. Their professions were also very different. The one at the front was an elf droll, but unlike the other droll, this droll was full of a rotten aura. Withered. Droll's most corrupt profession, an evil person who spread diseases and withers in nature. Standing in the second position was a human assassin. He had a pale face, and the dagger at his waist glowed with a black luster. At a glance, one could tell that it was smeared with terrible poison. The rotten aura spread. From the withered forest in front of them, an old woman with a haggard face walked out. Her face was covered with all kinds of religious tattoos. The soil she walked on also seemed to be infected with the disease, and there was a strange dark green color. She was the Lady of Poison, Lady of Plague, Goddess of Poison and Disease. Because of some reasons in her clergy, she was trapped in a body that used to be very beautiful but was now ravaged by disease and aging. She was a chaotic and evil god. Her greatest pleasure was to spread diseases and plagues, making people fear her name. Her believers included the fallen droll, assassins, and doctors. "My lord." A group of believers knelt down. The Lady of Poison's old face looked at them coldly, then turned her gaze to the north and said slowly, "Let's leave here first. I have a premonition that something annoying is approaching." The group quickly left. Not long after they left, an eagle's loud cry sounded. It swooped down from the sky, and the moment it landed, it turned into a droll covered in feathers. Poison, disease, plague. This is a disaster of nature. We must report to the Earth Walker immediately. The droll turned into an eagle again and flew away. Not long after he left, a tall female elf quickly approached. After she took a look, her face turned pale, and hurried to the elf forest. On this day, near the gathering place of races in this area, whether it was humans, elves, or gnolls on the other side of the mountain, people suddenly began to fall ill. The disease was not very serious, but the speed of infection was very fast. Nearly a third of the people in the nearby villages were infected, and nearly half of them had a fever. The doctors were helpless and could only ask the priests of the temple for help. Withered forest. A muddy river flowed from it. Beside the river were many animal corpses. The rotting roots were like ghosts in the shadows. The corpses of these animals had been piled up. There were not many living creatures in the entire forest. Arendelle, Royal Palace. When Soren took out the gifts he had prepared for the elder princess and Princess Anna, even the elder princess, who had always been calm, couldn't help but be surprised at the moment. She looked at the clear liquid in front of her and murmured, "Water of life? Fountain of youth?" Legendary spellcasters were very knowledgeable. Princess Royal recognized what it was at a glance, which was why she was so surprised. "Yes." Soren nodded slightly and said slowly, "One is for Anna, and the other is for you." Princess Royal's expression was slightly stunned, and then she said slowly, "You're very thoughtful. That's rare." She showed a faint smile to Soren, and it seemed that the initial rejection had lessened a lot. As a powerful warlock, Princess Royal's need for the life water was naturally not that high. But for Princess Anna, who did not have her talent, the life water's effect was quite amazing. Princess Anna could use its power to stay young, and at the same time, have a lifespan far beyond that of an elf. Soren. Princess Anna, wearing pure white pajamas, appeared in the hall. She trotted to Soren and threw herself into Soren's arms without hesitation. She hung her whole body on Soren's body. Princess Anna's expression at the moment had a hint of joy and a hint of bitterness. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but then she heard a suppressed cough from the side. Then she jumped down from Soren's body like a frightened rabbit and stood obediently behind Princess Royal. Princess Royal's expression suddenly became a little cold again. She looked at Soren as if he had stolen something important from her. Although she was not hostile, she was not very friendly either. She glanced at Princess Anna next to her and said seriously, "I have something very important to discuss with Sir Soren. Go back to your room and sleep first." After hesitating for a moment, Princess Royal handed the life water in her hand to Princess Anna next to her and said softly, "This is his gift to you. The legendary Fountain of Youth." Fountain of Youth? Princess Anna looked at it in surprise. When she looked up at Soren, her eyes were full of tenderness. No woman could resist the temptation of youth. Not to mention that this was given to her by Soren. Even an idiot should know how rare this thing was. Her biggest worry had always been that she was just an ordinary person who would gradually grow old with time, but now her biggest worry had disappeared. If Princess Royal was not here, the girl even wanted to throw herself into Soren's arms and give him a kiss at this moment. But in fact, this was simply impossible, because Princess Royal would be very angry, and because it would not be very harmonious. Princess Anna reluctantly left. In her heart, she was still afraid that her sister would be angry. Princess Royal's majesty was not to be offended. In Arendelle, Princess Royal had an absolutely noble status, and in Princess Anna's heart, Princess Royal was also like a sister and a mother. So at this moment, even if she was very reluctant, she still went back obediently. But she had made up her mind to let her personal maid watch outside. When her sister and Soren finished talking about important things, she would immediately sneak out. There were policies and countermeasures, she would not be so obedient. Chapter 631. The light of dawn shone on Arendelle. Princess Royal's figure appeared on the astrology platform. At this moment, she was wearing a simple blue dress. She looked like an ordinary girl. She didn't have the aura of a superior, but there was a hint of feminine beauty. At this moment, her expression seemed a little tired, as if she hadn't slept all night. Now that autumn had arrived, the temperature should be relatively high, but for some reason, the air around her was very cold. A layer of autumn frost seemed to have fallen on the astrology platform. This shouldn't have happened. Because everything in front of him meant that Princess Royal's power was a little out of control, and it seemed to have changed the surrounding environment a little bit. She once created an ice fortress out of thin air. With such great magic control skills, it was absolutely impossible for her to be so chaotic that even her own energy overflowed and affected the surrounding air. The power of a god. Princess Royal stood on the astrology platform and looked down at Arendelle in front of her. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She murmured, "What an elusive power." Since the last time she mysteriously disappeared for a while, her power had become more and more powerful. Sometimes, when Princess Anna faced her, she felt as if she was facing a god. But since then, Princess Anna also felt that there was something wrong with her sister. She liked to be alone more and more. Most of the time, she stayed alone on the astrology platform and didn't allow anyone to disturb her. Princess Royal was a little upset at the moment. Not only because of Soren's matter, but also because of her own troubles. During the time when she mysteriously disappeared, she went to another plane. There was a well-planned conspiracy against her. Although she successfully cracked the other party's trick and gained great power, there was another problem. That was, she was still just a mortal. A divine sorcerer could have powerful divine power, but she didn't have any divinity. Even her divinity was only inherited from her bloodline. Princess Royal couldn't absorb divinity and divinity like Soren. The excessive divine power caused her to gradually lose control of her own power. If I had to use a metaphor, the current Princess Royal was like the Witch of Terror, Lillian, at her peak. Relying on her powerful will, she could still control herself and not be affected by the power. But when it came to controlling the divine power, it was no longer as easy as it used to be. Besides, if the energy was too abundant, it would cause the divine power to overflow. That was why a layer of frost unnaturally condensed around her. Ascension to godhood was imminent. Princess Royal felt that her power was on the verge of going out of control. This was a huge power that mortals could not control. Only by using the template of a deity could she truly control this power. But ascending to godhood was definitely not an easy task. First of all, Princess Royal's divinity might not be enough. Secondly, she had almost no power of divinity. Then, she had not condensed a clergy suitable for herself. As long as the Winter Maiden had not fallen, it would be difficult for her to easily condense a clergy related to ice and snow. The only thing she didn't have to worry about was her divine power points. For some reason, the divine power she had accumulated was even close to the level of a mid-grade divine power deity. The Paladins had always hoped that Princess Royal would help them repair the Holy Avenger. But in this case, how could the Princess Royal help them do such a troublesome thing? Repairing the artifact was an extremely delicate process. Now she could not even gather all her power at ordinary times. It would be even more difficult to repair the Holy Avenger. But these things could never be told to the Paladins, even to Soren. Princess Royal could only hide everything in her heart and silently look for a solution. She was very strong-willed. As the ruler of Arendelle, she would never allow herself to show any weakness in front of others. Maybe it's time to fight her head-on. Princess Royal seemed to have made a decision in her heart. She looked into the distance and whispered, "Only the clergy of ice and snow can match my power. There must be a battle between me and the Winter Maiden. Soren. Maybe I can try to join forces with him. Because of Anna, he should be trustworthy." The Holy Avenger could not be repaired. But it could be considered to help Soren deal with the god of hunting. Soren did not know the power of the Holy Avenger because he was just a half-baked spellcaster. He did not know how much energy it would take to repair the most powerful artifact in the material plane. But Princess Royal was very clear about this. That was, if the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, she would fall into a long period of weakness. With the current chaotic situation on the continent, Arendelle's peace was entirely dependent on her power to deter everyone. If the Princess Royal fell into a long period of weakness, the entire Frost Kingdom would be seriously affected. The Holy Avenger. This was one of the most powerful weapons in the material plane. It had not been repaired yet, but it already had such amazing power. If it was completely repaired, people in the good camp would be eager to get it, and people in the evil camp would be afraid and want to destroy it. In Princess Royal's view, Soren was still a little inconsiderate in this matter. If the Holy Avenger was completely repaired, it was estimated that all the organizations in the evil camp on the continent would feel their hearts skip a beat. Because of their fear of the power of the Holy Avenger, it was hard to say what they would do. This was the same reason why the Flail of Time was broken into parts again and again. This matter might even attract other gods. After all, the last part of the Holy Avenger was the Eye of Tyr. This part came from the previous, God of Justice, greater divine power. It was an eyeball that was dug out before he fell. The Holy Avenger in its complete form was a 6th-grade artifact. Even the artifacts in the hands of many gods were not as powerful as it. This thing was a hot potato. Princess Royal had been delaying the paladins because she believed that the Holy Avenger should not be repaired, especially since the attitude of the God of Light and the Church of Justice was still unclear. Ta-ta-ta. A series of hurried footsteps came from outside. Princess Royal immediately frowned because this was a place where she meditated alone. Unless it was a very important matter, no one was allowed to disturb her. Your Majesty. A young and beautiful female official ran up in a panic. She held a document in her hand and said incoherently, "Not good. Plague. A very serious plague has occurred in the south." Plague? Princess Royal's face suddenly turned ugly. She quickly took the document and glanced at it. Her expression immediately became quite solemn. There really was a plague outbreak. What was even more frightening was that the plague this time didn't just infect humans. Even trees and flowers would be infected by the plague. It was close to the autumn harvest season, but all the crops in the south of the Frost Kingdom had withered. This was definitely not a natural disaster. Chapter 632. The news soon reached Soren. Because the plague spread very quickly, not only did it spread to the Frost Kingdom, but it also raged on the edge of the human gathering place and the elven forest. This was definitely not a plague that appeared in nature, because it was impossible for a natural plague to spread to humans and plants at the same time. Moreover, the speed of the plague this time was so fast that it made people wonder if there was someone secretly manipulating it behind the scenes. Has the Lady of Poison also fallen to the mortal world? Soren looked at the information in his hand and murmured, "Other than the Lady of Poison, there shouldn't be anyone who can spread the plague so quickly." The plague infected the crops. From the edge of the elven forest to the periphery of the Frost Kingdom, and then to the south of the Northern Tower, all of them were affected by this terrible plague. All the crops withered overnight. What was even more frightening was that if these infected crops were eaten by people, a new epidemic would soon break out. Many people who were not infected at first were infected because they ate infected animals and plants. The only thing to be thankful for was that although the plague this time was widespread, it did not cause too many casualties. The main reason was that during the infection period, the infected people would at most have a fever, but they did not die immediately. This gave time for all parties to react. This world had divine spells, and the priests could quickly treat the plague by relying on the disease removal spell. The only problem was that many people were infected again after being treated. It should be the work of the goddess of pestilence. Soren could not help but think of the god of the hunt, Malor. When the gods first fell to the mortal world, they lost most of their power. Therefore, the god of the hunt, Malor, caused great turmoil in the south. The hunters constantly used bloody sacrificial rituals to please the god and restore his lost divine power at the same time. The Lady of Poison's behavior should be the same. She spread the plague to make the mortals fearful, because the faith generated by the fear could also restore her lost divine power. The plague was still under control. It was estimated that the Lady of Poison did not dare to offend too many forces at the same time. Otherwise, many churches would unite to deal with her. Arendelle, Imperial Palace. At this moment, Princess Royal had regained her former majesty. In front of her was a group of Arendelle's court ministers. She glanced around and ordered in a deep voice, "Seal the passage to Icewind Valley immediately. Order the army to be stationed at Ice River City's Cold Wind Fortress. Before the plague crisis is resolved, no one is allowed to pass through. Mobilize the doctors and priests. Give the order to burn all the crops in the epidemic area. The Arendelle royal family will provide them with aid in the coming winter." Orders were issued one after another. Very soon, Arendelle's army was mobilized and directly cut off the passage to Icewind Valley. Currently, the plague was only wreaking havoc on the periphery. However, if it were to spread into the city, the disaster would be quite terrifying. Soren was also very cautious about this. He contacted the intelligence network on the south coast almost immediately and ordered everyone to be on their guard. They had to pay close attention to any possible followers of the goddess of pestilence. Now, they could only hope that the goddess of pestilence knew when to stop. Otherwise, they would have to gang up on her. Harvest City. Almost as soon as the plague appeared in the northern region, the Church of Agriculture was also operating rapidly. Speaking of the hatred between the goddess of pestilence and the goddess of agriculture, it all started from her mother, Mother Earth. This ancient deity had always hated the goddess of pestilence because she would spread terrible diseases in nature, destroying the beautiful natural environment until it was full of holes. After Mother Earth handed over her own priesthood to her daughter, who was now the goddess of agriculture, the goddess of agriculture also inherited the antagonistic relationship with the goddess of pestilence. The two churches had been in conflict for thousands of years, and it was basically a situation where they would fight whenever they met. At this moment, in a magnificent temple, a group of priests who believed in the goddess of agriculture had gathered together. At a glance, almost all of the priests here were bishops, and there were also many who had the strength of legendary. The goddess of agriculture's faith was very widespread. Her church had a rather large droll church. Here, and here. A middle-aged droll with a dignified face pointed at the map in front of him and said in a deep voice, "There are traces of the fallen of the Church of Pestilence's activities here. The goddess has sent an oracle to immediately stop the spread of the plague and at the same time, attack the enemy's strength. I'm afraid that this year's harvest has been affected. I hope that each parish can store food. If there is a famine, the church must immediately provide relief to the victims." Similar scenes were happening all over the place. Basically, the churches that were affected by the plague, whether good or evil, were full of hostility toward the goddess of pestilence. Although she had recovered a lot of power with the help of the plague, it was likely that she had gained a lot of hatred this time. Perhaps she didn't care at all. Because all along, the goddess of pestilence had been feared, hated, and revered by people. Even the gods were a little afraid of her. Because she had inherited a part of the power of the god of decay. The first generation of the goddess of fortune died because of the god of decay, and then the current twin of destiny was born. From then on, the god of decay began to fall to others, and finally, a part of it was inherited by the goddess of pestilence. This goddess, who was good at using poisons, had a large number of assassins as followers, and she had never been at a disadvantage in the mortal world. South of Autumn Fall. A strong smell of blood permeated the woods, and many corpses could be seen on the ground. The hunters were harvesting the enemy's lives. "I believe that the Lord will be satisfied with the sacrifice we offer." A one-eyed gnoll showed a grim smile on the corner of his mouth, waving a dagger and cutting the throat of an elf captive in front of him. In front of them, there was also an injured black cheetah. This fierce beast was now seriously injured and was easily captured by the hunters. Shadow Leopard. A creature born with 25 points of dexterity in adulthood, they were the favorite companions of the elven rangers. "Maybe we should hunt a dragon." A strong ogre came to the side of the one-eyed gnoll. Its eyes had a different light of wisdom from other gnolls. Suddenly, it swung the mace in its hand and roared angrily, "Damn werewolf! That's the dinner I prepared. Don't touch that elf. I'm going to take it back for supper." Chaos had begun to spread. And the first to cause all this was the gods of the chaotic evil camp. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.